co-chair. Let's get started. Robin, are you prepared to call roll? Great.
Heidi Umberling. Here. Lynn Philpott. Adrian Fine. Co-chair Dan Garber. Here. Annette Glankoff. Here. Jennifer Hedderly. Here. Hamilton Hitchings. Co-chair Arthur Keller. Shani Kleinhaus. Lydia Koo. Steve Levy. Don McDougall. Whitney McNair. Julia Moran. Mark Nadeem. Bonnie Packer. Lisa Peshke-Cote. Doria Suma. Amy Sung. Jason Titus. Elaine Wang. Ellen Erbrock. Alex Van Riesen. Bob Winslow.
He's outside.
Okay. Okay, 20 present.
Thank you. Now is the time for anyone that would like to speak on any topic to speak. I have 4 speaker cards. If anyone would like to speak, please fill out a speaker card. Looks like we have a 5th as well. The first speaker is Don Barr, to be followed by Linnea Wickstrom. Yes, there you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening. I'm Don Barr, and I am the veteran of multiple knockdown, drag-out battles over what is the appropriate use of a particular zone designation. I'm talking about the Opportunity Center, and I'm talking about the 801 Alma affordable housing for families. And I just want you to know that this issue of affordable housing, especially affordable housing targeting the very low and extremely low income populations, i.e. those making, you ready for this, very low income in Palo Alto by federal standards is a family of 4 making less than $60,000 a year is very low income. But then also the issue of permanent supportive housing, which the Opportunity Center has been providing for nearly 10 years, and we certainly need more of, both on the peninsula. So I want you just to be sure that in targeting how we're going to designate the appropriate zone districts, and I know that you're talking about that in terms of a diverse, inclusive community with mix of housing types, but you're also talking about residential neighborhoods within walking distance of commercial neighborhoods, and that's where you bump up against things. Please be sure that you put into the plan that there should be special attention paid to and zoning designations for affordable housing for the very low and extremely low income populations, and for permanent supportive housing for the homeless. Because without those zone designations, we're not going to get more of these facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Linnea Wickstrom, to be followed by Jan Stokely.
Good evening. My name is Linnea Wickstrom. I live on Monroe Drive in Palo Alto. And my son, Per, is here tonight. There he is. He's a young adult with disabilities. I'm here to urge you to support a couple things in land use. Number 1, the city to work with Housing Choices and other agencies to create affordable housing for people with developmental disabilities. And like the one, my son is now living at 1585 Studios in El Camino in Mountain View, which was a collaboration of First Community Housing, Housing Choices, and the city. That's notable, high density, transit oriented. It's right on El Camino. So they take buses, get to the light rail, etc. And I always like to point out that you can be very innovative with lot size and so forth for this kind of development, because very few adults with disabilities drive or own cars. They do have to have support staff and so forth, some parking, but housing, the 1585 Studios, for instance, has 10 parking spots for support staff, the property manager, etc. And only 2 of 26 residents actually own a car or are able to drive. And I know parking is a big issue in Palo Alto, so that's one of the kind of ameliorating factors for this kind of housing. The second thing is I would like to urge the city to reduce the bars to granny units. For the long haul, for me and for many parents of children with disabilities, granny units can be an affordable, practical solution for independent or supported living in an impossible housing market. Personally, I have a 10,000 square foot lot. The only barrier really to me is the parking thing. And once again, we're talking people who don't require a lot of parking. So I know several of you are already advocating for people with disabilities amongst other populations that need affordable housing, and I thank you for including this in your recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Jan Stokely, followed by Pat Saffer.
Thank you. Jan Stokely, Housing Choices Coalition. Following up on the remarks of Linnea and her son Per, who are living the experience of an older resident family of Palo Alto whose adult child is in need of affordable housing in order to live independently. What I want to do is share a little bit of the data with you so that you have a sense of the scale of the issue in Palo Alto, and urge you to take advantage of any opportunity in your land use plans to support the creation of affordable, high-density, transit-oriented housing that will be inclusive of the needs of this population. Just real quickly, there are 437 people with developmental disabilities living here in Palo Alto. 88% are living at home with parents, which is a really high percentage. Of the 216 Palo Alto adults with developmental disabilities, only 48 are able to live in their own apartment here in Palo Alto. This means that there are approximately 168 adults with developmental disabilities in Palo Alto living at home with aging parents. We have been referred 51 people from Palo Alto in the past year who need help finding affordable housing. And again, most of them are adults who are living at home with aging parents who need to begin to make plans for their child to live on their own in the community. The greatest barrier to this is affordable housing. San Andreas Regional Center is a state-funded organization that serves these residents and provides the services that residents need to live independently in the community. So the service part of the equation of the permanent supportive housing for people with developmental disabilities is funded, and the challenge that we face, and the one that we need you to address, is to make sure that housing is developed where there are a certain number of units affordable to extremely low income, so that we can provide the services and provide the housing in an inclusive setting that really mirrors your values as a city to provide a community that is welcome and makes a home for everyone who lives here. So I know that the land use plan is very challenging and poses many issues, but look at 1585 Studios in Mountain View as a success story where a very small, strangely shaped lot was used to develop 27 very lovely units for people with developmental disabilities at affordable rents right on El Camino, where they have access to transit, library, shopping, everything that they could need. So it's being done in other cities, and we urge you to take advantage of this opportunity to figure out how to help it get done in Palo Alto. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Robin, will you amend the minutes to show that co-chair Keller has joined us? The next speaker is John, that was Pat Saffer, correct?
No, that was not Pat Saffer.
Oh, that's, yes, okay. So please, the next speaker is Pat Saffer, followed by John Kelly.
Have I got this at the right height? I'm speaking tonight for the League of Women Voters. Chairman Keller and Garber and the committee. While the League of Women Voters recognizes that the land use element covers many topics, our comments this evening are focused on housing. Please note that our letter for the December 15th, 2015 CAC meeting expressed our desires for maintaining the urban growth boundary and for developing complete streets and worrying about climate change. It is encouraging that the land use element makes mention of mixed-use development with residential added, and particularly smaller unit styles at many locations, such as in CC, CN, CS, and CD districts. Too often, however, the element uses the terms evaluate, consider, and possibly, rather than create, encourage, or simply zone for more housing. A further concern is that although mixed use is great for housing, if the City Council chooses to maintain a tight square foot commercial development cap, housing will not be constructed because it is part of the commercial development that is being discouraged. Please write the comprehensive plan language such that housing will be encouraged, realistically zoned along transit corridors, and within our CC, CN, CS, and CD districts, as well as such places as the Stanford Research Park. Mixed use is great, but standalone multiple unit housing must be feasible and encouraged as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last speaker of the evening is John Kelly. If anyone else would like to speak, please forward me a card.
I'm not going to have time to say everything I want to say on this issue because I think this is one of the most important things for Palo Alto. I'm sure you all recognize that housing is an absolute critical problem for our community. If you haven't figured that out during this process, I would encourage you to go talk to somebody who's gotten kicked out of their house, who's trying to move here, or someone who's a senior who's aging out of place. So I'm going to distribute just a really short little PowerPoint. You can go in opposite sections. And I just want to say one thing in particular about ADUs, because I think that's part of the solution here. I think alternative dwelling units or secondary units are a great way to provide a lot of housing, and I mean a lot of housing in this community, quickly, inexpensively, and to serve the needs of the people who need it most. And what I'd like to say about ADUs or secondary units or granny units is that they really are friendly. They're great for the community. I'd like to give you 4 specific reasons why you should think about them this way. First of all, they're family friendly. They're good for seniors, they're good for children, they're good for parents, and perhaps most importantly, they're good for what I would call continuity in our community. People who've grown up here, people who've lived here, people who've worked here, and people who'd like to continue their lives here. I have friends who are getting kicked out of this community, even though they've... I have friends who are getting kicked out of this community, basically, even though they've grown up very near to my home. I think that's a travesty. I think that's a shame. I think we have a duty as a community to those who've grown up here. But we also have a duty to people whose parents want to be near their loved ones. ADUs can be senior friendly. They're going to allow more people to age in place, and they're going to provide supplemental income to people who aren't, billionaires in Silicon Valley. ADUs are also community friendly. They'll promote greater diversity in the community, and perhaps even more importantly, they will begin to address a problem we are all going to confront if we keep living here, which is just generational imbalance. We know that the community is getting older, and we need to have opportunities for younger people to join us in this community. Otherwise, what's Palo Alto going to look like? And finally, I'd like to say that ADUs are values friendly. Let's just think about what's important to us. We hear time and time and time again about parking, okay? If parking's a problem, let's put a price on parking, let's control it that way. Let's not use land use or zoning as a means to deal with congestion or parking. So I would submit to you that people are more important than cars. I'd also like to say that people are more important than stuff. I've done a rough count on my block. I think maybe 15, maybe 20, best case 25% of the people on my block actually keep a car in their garage. Most of us all know that land is too valuable here. So we keep stuff there. Sometimes we've got pool tables. I've got a pool table in my garage. Let's be honest with one another and say that we don't really keep cars in our garages. So let's stop using parking requirements or garage requirements for denying people an opportunity to live in our community, especially people who've lived here for a long time. I fully support everything that was said before about meeting the needs of people with disabilities, but there are a lot of people without disabilities who need better housing in Palo Alto. They need better choices. So this thing's circulating around. I'm not going to tick all this off, but I invite you to look at the specifics that I said on the second half of this slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Neil Shea, who is our last speaker, unless I get another card.
Thank you. And I may just share some themes that have already been said, but and I think a lot of folks are saying we need to address our housing shortage, and I don't see how we do fully address the deep housing shortage that we have only with ADUs, and if we insist on keeping the height limit. I think we need to find certain areas in transit centers where we need to be able to relax the height limit and put up some attractive, comfortable, taller multifamily units of the kind that many other communities have had good luck with. And I think we need to find ways to create more housing in Palo Alto, both to address the ongoing congestion and transportation needs, and to keep Palo Alto what it has been, which is a place that people that aren't super rich are welcome to be here. So I think my comment is we need an all of the above strategy. I definitely agree that that parking costs should trend up to the cost of actually providing the parking, and we probably have to look forward to a world where we're not all in a single occupancy vehicle for all of our transportation needs. But I would strongly encourage us not to be afraid of designating certain areas of the city to go beyond the height limits and allowing some real density to flourish in some areas. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other cards. We will move on to our next agenda item, which is staff comments. Hillary, Elena?
Well, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the land use element. This is going to be the beginning of the hard part. I just wanted to, before we dig into the business of the meeting, there are a few things I wanted to do. First, I wanted to recap what happened at the council meeting on February 22nd. So that was the day, if you recall, the council had requested a discussion of the jobs housing imbalance in Palo Alto and development of what they called the fifth scenario, which is now the quality of life scenario for inclusion in the EIR before it's done. So it was a really great discussion. We started by showing a presentation of the jobs housing balance here in Palo Alto as it compares to the county as a whole and the region as a whole, and the differences are striking. We have a ratio of jobs to employed residents that's about 3 to 1, whereas in the region as a whole and in the county of Santa Clara, the ratio is much closer to 1 to 1. And so the council accepted that presentation and then really started to focus on what that means in terms of quality of life, and have asked us to develop a series of options and information and bring back to them so that they can formulate this fifth scenario for analysis and inclusion in the EIR before we get to the end of this process. So what we're going to do as a result of the council's direction first is to gather some more input and intelligence from conversations with the council on a variety of issues. Next Monday, we have a conversation that is specific to housing sites and programs. The staff report is already available on the website if you want to take a look at it. It talks about the housing sites in the current housing element and the programs that were identified for implementation in the early years of the housing element, and is asking the council for input and direction on a number of those sites and programs. So we'll get the council's direction on Monday on housing-related issues. Then on April 18th, the council will have the annual Earth Day report and hopefully a presentation from Gil on sustainability issues. So we'll gather from that conversation the council's input and direction on those issues. And then on April 25th, the council's scheduled to have their hearing on the draft EIR. And so it's an opportunity, we hope, for the council to look closely at the mitigation measures that we've included in the EIR, as well as all the data and analysis that's provided. But what would be particularly useful for us in crafting this fifth scenario is a focus on the mitigation regime and what should be added, changed, strengthened, et cetera. So we're going to take all of that information, develop some of the data and responses that the council requested on February 22nd and go back to them in May after the close of the comment period with some options and discussion about the fifth scenario, or the quality of life scenario. What you do in the course of your review of the land use element is also going to be of help to us. Obviously, we would love to get your thoughts and ideas as we start to craft this series of options or recommendations to the council. So we'll be listening closely this evening and at your next meeting in April. I did want to invite the CAC to send a delegation to the meeting on Monday. We actually had a conversation about the schedule on February 22nd as well with the council, and unfortunately it was late at night. I'm not sure any of us were at our best. I certainly wasn't, and we didn't get a lot of specific direction on the schedule, but we did hear a couple things. One was an invitation, rather than, because we don't have a joint meeting with the CAC scheduled on housing issues, an invitation for the CAC to send a delegation, and I hope the chair will ask for volunteers and appoint less than a quorum to come and be part of that discussion on Monday. Then we also talked with the council about some of the constraints that we've put in place about subcommittees. Those of you who are Brown Act savvy know that this group is subject to the Brown Act. Technically, our subcommittees are not subject to the Brown Act, but as the council directed us to set up and establish subcommittees, there was a concern about transparency, and so they asked us to ensure those meetings are noticed to the public. And so we have been enforcing these kind of Brown Act light rules with regard to the subcommittees and reminding ourselves and you incessantly about how to make that work. I think the council is still okay with all of that, but they did want us to be a little more flexible when committee members want to talk to each other outside of this meeting. As long as you're not engaging with a quorum, either at one time or serially, they thought we could ease up a little bit on the constraints about communication and encourage you to reach out to people who think similarly to you, but also to people with whom you disagree and in between our meetings, and see if you can't make some progress outside the meetings. And if you have any questions about that Brown Act stuff, Elena and I are always available to answer them. Just a couple more things on process. I know on every agenda we have this feedback for continuous improvement, but again, it's always at the end of the meeting when we're kind of in a rush and we're maybe not at our best. I would like to invite any of you who have questions or suggestions or concerns about our process to reach out to me between the meetings, and we can engage in a more direct and hopefully fruitful conversation about any suggestions that you have for our process. I've been through quite a number of planning processes like this. We're kind of at the point in any long and involved process where there's like that freak out moment, like, oh my God, we're not going to be able to do this, and that's natural. We will get over that. We are all coming to this, I think, with the kind of intelligence and generosity of thinking that will get us over that hump, and I think make, in the end of the day, a very, very fruitful effort. A couple more things. I wanted to thank Elena for stepping up and all of her work during this last month to coordinate the committees and the packets and everything. She's done a fantastic job. Andrew has helped, and other staff as well. We are still looking to bring in a project manager to replace Jeremy in his role with the comp plan update. And I'm really fingers crossed, hoping to have someone at our next meeting. So we're making some headway on that and have an announcement in April. Finally, just wanted to let you know that for the second month in a row, I am double booked this evening. I have to be at a council finance committee meeting, so I will be leaving after an hour. But I will get a full report from Elena and from the co-chairs, and I wish you all the best with a very, very meaty subject, luckily spread over the next 2 meetings. So anything we don't get to today, we will try and tackle next month. Thank you. Did you want to do the?
Yes. Although I cannot see any of you. What we would like to do is, actually, you could probably raise your hands if you would like to volunteer for the committee. And I will announce your names when you raise your hands for those that would like to volunteer to be the CAC's representatives on the housing discussion. We want to have at least 3, but not more than 5, and Arthur and I will end up doing the selection, and we will do our best to spread the distribution geographically as the council has been interested in the past. I'm seeing Elaine, Amy, Lydia, Doria, Julia, Bonnie, Steve. Anyone else? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 7. Okay. At some point in the very near future, we'll tell you who goes. Probably not tonight. Okay. Hillary, did you also want to, I think you've already done this, but item 1A, the recap of key points, was there more that you wanted to talk about there? I think Andrew's going to do that. Andrew. Okay. Welcome, Andrew.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So,
Thank you, Elena.
thank you. I just wanted to make a few opening statements, and then I'll pass this on to Andrew to get into the land use details. But staff we just wanted to add that we've clearly heard from everyone concerns about consistency between the elements, and then consistency specifically with the SCAP, given the sustainability subcommittee that happened on Wednesday. So we just wanted to stress that this is the beginning of the process, and the intention is to focus really on the programs and policies, really to dive into the details. There will be opportunity at the end of the process when we can look at everything holistically. At that point, we'll see how all the pieces fit together. There'll be opportunities for us to adjust the pieces and also to do the prioritization exercise that we discussed earlier. So just also to stress that, we're in communication, daily communication or regular communication with Gil and his group to make sure that there is consistency between the SCAP and our process, so we won't come to a situation where there's obvious conflicts between the two. So we are going to have regular conversations. And also, additionally, in terms of sustainability issues, there'll also be opportunity to get into those details with the natural resources element that's coming up. So we're hoping that that through this process, we'll get into the details, and at the end of the process, then we can work together to look at the connections and make those changes as necessary. And also, I've heard also from everyone, not everyone has received the EIR, so I'll send an email out to everyone to verify if they've received it and if they need another copy. So with that, Andrew, thank you.
Okay, I wanted to take a couple of minutes just to recap what we've heard about the community, about the land use and community design elements so far, in order to set up the detailed discussion that you are going to have. As you may remember, back in the fall, City Council weighed in with some direction to staff on the goals and particular content of this element, and their motion is included in your packet tonight as attachment C. And then in December, the full CAC had your first meeting on the land use element, and you had sort of a general discussion on broad priorities for the element. And what we heard from that discussion were several broad points of consensus, including support for the use of coordinated area plans as a planning tool for targeted areas of the city, for the need for regional collaboration on housing, for example. And we also heard some support for a mix of housing types in the community in order to support a thriving, diverse community. And so on the basis of that feedback from council and the points of consensus from the CAC meeting in December, staff and the consultants have gone ahead and we felt that we had some pretty good direction. So we started with the current adopted policy framework for the land use and community design element. That's included as attachment B in your packet tonight, and then the changes to reflect direction from council or the points of consensus from your December discussion are shown in track changes in attachment B. Another thing that's also reflected in attachment B is mitigation measures from the EIR that pertain to shade shadow studies, protection of historic and cultural resources have also been input into that attachment B, and they're also shown in track changes. So we put this in front of you as a way of moving the ball forward. We'd like to get your reaction to that. And so please, when you make your comments, feel free to comment on that. But another thing that came up in the discussion back in December were several topics where we really had a wide range of ideas, differing ideas on the CAC. And those topics are also listed in the staff report for tonight's meeting. They include different ideas on a new mixed-use designation and whether office should be included in that or not. Different ideas on height limits, raising the height limits or not, and commercial growth limits, and the idea of shifting housing sites. So these are areas where still further discussion among the CAC is required to give staff and the consultants direction as to how to incorporate consensus into the updated policy framework. And so we hope tonight that you will all take some time in your comments to focus in particularly on those issues and start to move towards consensus that staff and the consultants can take away and continue to build into the element. We hope that focusing on these areas will also spark a discussion and lively conversation too. So that would be another hope for this evening's meeting.
All right, we're going to start our first round unless, Arthur, is there anything else that we need to address? Rather than going to my left as I normally do, I'm going to start with my right. Lisa, nice hat. Can you start off? You'll have 2 minutes plus the sort of space between the timer, which probably averages out to about 3 by the time we're there. Oh, excuse me. I apologize, Lisa. Yes, I had forgotten. We wanted to get comments from the Sustainability Committee, which met, I guess, earlier this week, and their suggestions for this element. The members of the Sustainability Committee, could you raise your hand, please? There. Steve. So 3 of you met. I know that Steve was not there. Bob, Don, Shani. Was there anyone else? Gotcha. Yeah.
Thank you. I just also wanted to add that with your at places, that was also emailed earlier, is a summary of the subcommittee discussion that happened last Wednesday.
Bob, do you want to go first, and then Don, and then Shani?
So I think one of the major outcomes of the discussion, and I'm sure others will come in, was that we chose a definition of sustainability, and in that, that's where I'm actually trying to find that definition right now. Is that in the minutes? Am I looking at it? Oh yeah, here we are. And I just thought I'd read it. Sustainability is based on a simple principle: everything that we need for our survival and well-being, either directly or indirectly, on our natural environment. To pursue sustainability is to create and maintain the conditions under which humans and nature can exist in productive harmony to support present and future generations. So the meeting had Gil Friend coming in to speak to the SCAP. And one of the things that we noticed was that within the SCAP and our comprehensive plan were kind of two different spirits of what sustainability was. And where our discussion involved was, rather than using the SCAP where it brought in topics of economy and social justice, that we ended up realizing that sustainability would be more clearly defined if it spoke to more of an environmental space rather than trying to mix in economy. And I actually was holding out for some of the economy and social justice topics, but I think what we learned was that it would be better if sustainability was more pure as a topic. And so that was where we went with the discussion. I think we, as a group, we really struggled with the hidden elements of the SCAP. You know, as a team, we don't have the SCAP right now. We have some great PowerPoint slides. We have the spirit of the SCAP, but it lacks the detail. And my sense of during the meeting, we explored what the force of the SCAP as a document would be versus the force of the comprehensive plan. So I think it's unclear right now, what force does the SCAP trump the comp plan? Does the comp plan trump the SCAP? And I think, we just couldn't really manage to bottom out on that. I don't know if I'll flip it over to another member just to fill in anything that I missed.
Don and then Shani.
So I just want to protect, repeat. The EPA definition was what we really focused in on. That basically says well-being depends either directly or indirectly on our natural environment. And that's really what we wanted to focus on relative to sustainability. Within that, we were interested in the fact that there needed to be some compromises made within the whole structure of everything that we're doing in Palo Alto and in the CAC. And that brought about the fact that within sustainability, in order to maintain parks and all the other things we want to maintain, we need to think about raising the height limit in certain areas. We need to model that somehow so that we understand the impacts, and it can't be done without consideration, but we really need to consider that. We all believe that the airport component of the transportation element should be moved into the land use element. And we also believe that, I'll leave it at that and see if Shawnee wants to add anything else.
Shani.
Thank you. I think you covered most of the things I wanted to talk about, which was the definition and the airport. We felt strongly about that and about the question of how to integrate the SCAP, or the Sustainability Climate Action Plan, for those who are not familiar with that term, because I don't think we defined it here, and the plan, the comprehensive plan, and where do things come in and how do they work together. And since we don't have the SCAP, we don't know. And so, and there was some CEQA documents that were handed out to us early on that indicated that there is some, that it wasn't clear to us which one trumps which, if these things are not compatible. I hope they are, I expect they will be, but we don't know that, and that was a long discussion on that. The issue of nature is part of the sustainability. Since I was there, that came up, and the need for more parks. One other thing that we talked about is the need to really look at sea level rise and look at the definitions from the SCAP were protect, adapt, and retreat. So how do we protect our city from sea level rise? How do we adapt to it? And how do we retreat from the danger areas? And to that, we tried to consider, what do you do east or north of 101? What do you do there? Is there something we can do as a city to plan retreat in some of those areas that are going to be flooded sooner or later? So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Gil?
So certainly our goal is to have these be compatible and complementary, not duplicative. We're not trying to have the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan cover all the same ground and all the same detail the comp plan is doing, and vice versa. We've had an administrative draft, went through senior staff review, a half-day workshop a couple of weeks ago. We've now boiled that down, and tomorrow we're introducing into the internal review process the draft Sustainability and Climate Plan aimed at a council meeting for April 18th. So whatever the timing is, I guess about 10 days or 2 weeks before that meeting, there'll be a draft on the street for you to review and be able to look at that in more detail. So I'm sorry it's taken so long, but we've got a process that we have to go through. There are a bunch of areas of overlap, and also we recognize that these two plans are really coming at some similar issues from some different directions. The comprehensive plan is building on an existing plan and modifying it. The climate plan is standing in the challenge of what do we do about climate change and looking more backwards at how do we get there. And so there'll be a challenge, I think, of reconciling these or accepting certain differences between them. And those are questions that we'll get into as it's on the street. So again, April 18th to council for that. On the matter of sea level rise, there is a separate staff initiative that I think now Hillary is scheduled for early May for a study session on sea level rise. So there'll be a lot more detail about that. It's reflected in the climate plan, but not in as much detail as you'll see in the separate element. And I think that's probably what I could add usefully at this point.
Can I ask a question?
Shani?
I think in one of the recent city council meetings, there was a directive that the fifth scenario will include the SCAP. So that's going to be part of the plan?
The council's direction on that fifth scenario or the quality of life scenario was that it be compatible with and incorporate elements of the SCAP. So that's part of the reason I said we're going to have to listen to the council's feedback and direction on April 18th, and then use that information to bring back some options for them in mid-May about this scenario.
Okay, with that, let's start our round. Lisa, you're first, followed by Steve.
Thanks. And I did my comments really in the way you were asking about the points of consensus and then the place where there might be more. So I'm just going to share my views on those differences. Is that right? Okay. So on the points of consensus, agree on the points. One, I think I might stress on the mix of housing is that we talked about diversity and we did include Is it not on? Is that better? Okay. So I'm agreeing that with the points of consensus, I agree. I think we did largely all agree on those. I would add on the mix of housing options that one of the ones I personally care a lot about is the economic diversity, and it's certainly mentioned, but again, I think that was enough that it might be a consensus. And then one other possible point of consensus, I think we all said that we thought that housing, transportation, sustainability, it all fits together. And so at the end, we wanted to make sure it was sort of internally consistent at the end. Again, just a point of consensus. Then going to the ones for the further discussion, the mixed use designations, again, sharing my view on this is I definitely like the idea of the mixed use. And personally, I would go for housing and retail and small business offices, but not large business offices. I think the communities that have huge Apple and Google presence have some issues that I don't think we really want. But I like the idea of the mixture. The height limits, similar to what you're saying on the sustainability side, I actually think much as I originally protested against all the high buildings that were coming up downtown and such, I actually think with the wave of the future, it does make sense to have some higher buildings in certain areas, like along Alma, possibly along El Camino. I'm not picking favorite, but in certain areas close to transit where it won't be as disruptive of the neighborhood, et cetera. I actually do. And then trade it off against more parks, less cars, less parking needed in those developments. So it's that trade-off. The commercial growth limits, I know the city council will be deciding the next two, just sharing my view on it, is I think some cap on office and retail is a good idea. except maybe in certain areas that we want to promote that development there, right? So again, it's a strategy. I hope will continue to grow in all areas, but I do think that there's probably more need for some housing, especially some of the mixed use we talked about. But I think the cap has to be flexible. That's it.
Thank you. Steve? Followed by Bonnie.
I support Lisa's remarks on housing and the height limit, and I'm thankful to John, and I think it was Neil and Pat and Bonnie's letter, and associate myself with the desire to see expanded housing options for the people who are here. But also for me, my quality of life that Nancy and I and Becky and Dave had when we were living here was that we had a diverse range of people. And so I was particularly taken by John Kelly's remark that I echo, that we are, through no fault yet of anyone, on a path where you have to be a really old and long-time homeowner or really rich to live here. And I don't know about you, but that diminishes my quality of life. It's not just about cars on the street and the number of people. It's about the diversity, as Lisa said, of the people we see. So I hope we talk about quality of life, and I hope Hillary and for the committee, we've had so many people come and talk about more housing and more choices, that in the EIR process, our community is at least allowed to explore that, knowing that the next council will make the final decision. I'm at peace with that. But if we don't explore that, it feels like disrespecting all of the people who have come forth tonight and at council meetings and asked for more ingenuity in this most innovative community about housing, knowing that most of it, and certainly if we go taller, will be in areas near shopping and services, because that's what makes sense for people and the environment. So I don't think we're talking about encroaching on R1 neighborhoods or the South. That'll be something the council will discuss in the 22nd meeting. So yeah, quality of life to me means more than how hard it is to find a place to park. It's about the people and the welcoming in my community.
Thank you, Bonnie. Then Julia.
I wholeheartedly embrace all the wonderful statements that are being said about the need for more housing, especially affordable housing, so I won't go use my 2 minutes for that. My comments that I submitted at your places go through a lot of detail, suggestions for edits to the various programs and policies. But one important one, I think, and I know council is dealing with this now, and that's the issue of caps on commercial square footage. I don't think our comp plan should put in specific numbers with regard to that. This is an issue that is currently bothering people. This in 2016. In 2020, it may not be. And so we should probably have language in there that says periodically review caps on the amount of square feet for non-residential development in appropriate areas of the city. In other words, let's have a general policy instead of let's put a cap of X amount of square feet, because we don't know what's going to be in 15 years, 20 years. And the other thing we might want to consider is that instead of having, since we want housing, instead of using the space that's in our commercial zones, allow housing in the commercial zones where I think it was taken out of some of the commercial zones recently, put it back in and encourage, have policies that encourage square footage for use of residential square feet instead of non-residential, if that's where we want to go. And as far as all the impact of the jobs, we're dealing with that with in the transportation element, with the parking and the getting out of your single use. A couple of things on housing, though. I strongly urge us to consider a coordinated area plan for San Antonio Road, because that is coming before council on Monday, and I don't know if anybody studied that area, and all of a sudden they're saying, oh, we don't have services there. Well, how do you know? If you put housing, you might have developed the basis for services, you know. It's the chicken before the egg. So that's a coordinated area plan for San Antonio Road. And there's some other policies that were put in here that were kind of overreaching in the historical preservation section. All of a sudden there was a new policy about evaluate every demolition to see if the building is historical. To require an evaluation every time somebody wants to demolish something is really going counter to what we've done in the past about historical designation. So those are a couple of my main points. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia?
Great. So I would echo the points that the three speakers before me said, especially Lisa's points. And just on a broader note, I think under this interesting presidential campaign process, I think it's been made clear that there are so many places in our country where people are losing jobs or underemployed, and I think that we need to remind ourselves what a privileged problem we have, that we have so many high-paying jobs that we need to figure out how to manage that. I feel pretty fortunate to be here. I moved here a few years ago, and the reason why I chose Palo Alto as opposed to the other cities around here is because it has such a vibrant community, and there's an energy about Palo Alto specifically that I think we need to continue. And I think that the city's evolving. It won't be what it was 30 years ago, and won't be what it is today, and I think that's fantastic, and I think we need to push forward with that. And in order to do that, people need to be able to live here. And just quick Google search, the average household in the U.S. Or in Palo Alto income is about $122,000, which is 2.5 times the U.S. average. The median house sales price is $2.2 million, which is 10 times the average for the country. So, as I think I'm the only renter here, I'm not planning on buying anytime soon because it just doesn't seem reasonable to me to spend my money buying when I can rent. And I think that until we have more units, we're not going to have young families investing in our community. And if that's important to our community, which I think it should be, we really need to look at adding more housing. I think Mountain View has taken a great step with their announcement this past week, 2 weeks ago. And I think we can learn from that and add more specifically kind of the similar things that Lisa was saying, but more housing. Thanks.
Thank you. Heidi?
Thank you. I echo an agreement about economic diversity in housing, so just for the record. I also appreciate, I think Jennifer made these comments, but I appreciated this redlined version in the packet. That was very helpful for me, so thanks for doing that. I also thought it was much more effective and efficient for me than going back and forth between the other two and trying to figure out all the comments, and so thank you. That was, in terms of process, very helpful. I like that idea of a coordinated area plan for San Antonio. Nice idea. So for mixed use designations, and actually before I say that, I think for all the things in which there are sort of more discussion needed, I think we have to remember the old saying, there are two things people hate, right? Density and sprawl. So I think we're seeing that here in terms of the controls we're trying to make. And I really like the point that growth control should be balanced with growth enablement, and sort of looking at general guiding policies as opposed to the specific numbers, as opposed to a specific number on a height limit. If there's a trade-off for housing, then we would balance the needs of what we wanted. So I think there has to be balance. You can't decide all the decisions now because we can't predict. We need the comp plan to be somewhat flexible, for future decisions. I, along with several people in this room, served on the Housing Element Committee last year, and so of course we had many discussions about housing there, and so I'm in support of implementing the current housing element that we came up with in terms of shifting the housing sites to more transit locations, and would be happy to move forward with that after the year's worth of work that those of us who served on that committee did. So I just wanted to add my comment that. And then, yes, mixed use, retail and housing would be my priority, promoting ground level retail in commercial districts as well. And just one last thing is no on the zero setback. Nobody likes Alma Plaza. That's a big reason. So thank you.
Thank you, Whitney.
There's a desire throughout the comp plan to improve the jobs housing balance, and many cities in the area have really grown their jobs, but they keep their jobs housing ratio in balance by adding additional housing. So the comp plan is really, all I've seen is a lot about limiting jobs to get that balance, but the flip side of that is one could also add housing. So I don't want to lose sight of the housing piece of the puzzle. The EIR considers housing in the research park, and it's at the corner of El Camino and Page Mill. And so through some market research that Stanford's done, we've identified there's a few missing uses in the research park, including a hotel and a conference center, and food and beverage facilities as well. So the EIR considers an opportunity at Palo Alto Square. However, the way the development's really described in the staff report is it just adds housing along the edge in the parking lot. So we took a look at that based on the densities that are shown. And in order to get that number of units, the building heights and the parking requirements and really the breadth of that site needs to be considered. So standard zoning might not work there. And the comp plan talks about maybe opportunities for overlay zones. So if this type of development is supposed to be one of those strings and the pearl, the necklace, the pearls, as described in the staff report, and if you really want to make a cultural change and allow a real mix of using with housing in there and reimagine transportation for a development, you have to think about expanding that area so it's just not the little strip that's along El Camino. You really need to make something that's a little more substantial. Otherwise, you just continue that typical El Camino Real pattern. It's just one more spot along El Camino rather than creating something special. I agree with Bonnie's comments on the cap, so I won't repeat those. And policy L44 talks about the research park as a compact employment center, and then there's a note that the CAC, this policy could change depending on council direction regarding the preferred scenario. I just question how that might change and want to keep our eye on that. And that's all.
Okay, we'll call that the Glenn Miller thought, the string of pearls. Alex.
I wanted to add, obviously the discussion about affordable housing is important. I guess the piece that feels missing to me in most of the discussion is any kind of sense of how much it would take for things to be different. And it seems to me, unless I'm missing something, that it's market driven in terms of how much things will cost. Because you'll build these units and unless you zone them specifically. So I don't see the language in here where it says it is zoned for a certain price or a certain threshold. One of my suggestions was, is there a study or can we get a study on how much it would take for prices to change with regards to affordable units or affordable living in Palo Alto? It seems to me, and I agreed with Jennifer in what she wrote, it was overly simplistic to expect that if we build enough housing, it'll be affordable to all. I don't see an explanation for that. I'd also just don't understand too that there's a lot of language about studios and even at some point in their micro units, but it seems like most of our general conversation is about families. And so there's a discontinuity there between building micro units. Those aren't for families. That's just for one individual who is working there in the community. And so I think we need to decide. I agree there needs to be different types of affordable housing, but to say that that bandwidth is all of those, I think there needs to be a closer scrutiny of what are we trying to achieve? Who are we trying to draw? What kind of units will we build? And I would say I disagree with the breadth of those units. I do think, I appreciate also Jennifer's comment. I do agree with the height limit, but I thought a meaningful discussion on those. And if there was particular zones, but I would not want to leave it open to just sort of people to decide on a case-by-case basis. I just wanted to highlight one specific one, goal L2, policy L11. It's about the mixed use. The mix, just as an illustration of my previous comment, mix of types, sizes, and affordability. I do not know how you can encourage affordability. So I'd love to hear someone comment on that. There's nothing affordable in my neighborhood, and what determines affordability is the highest price that you can get for it. And so no matter what you build, it will be competed for to get the highest price that you can get for it.
Thank you. Jennifer.
So, excuse me. I agree that we have consensus around promoting a mix of housing options, and that seems to be consistent all the way around. What I think we need further discussion about is what we want that mix to accomplish. I think more unaffordable housing, no matter what size or type or location, is not a solution to any of the problems that we're facing right now. It doesn't meet the needs of seniors or our workforce. It doesn't improve our economic diversity. I think we need a common understanding among all of us about what we mean when we say affordable, just as Alex mentioned, what tools we have to promote affordability at, say, 100% of median income or 150% of median income, and how our policies and programs are going to narrowly promote affordability goals while also restraining unaffordable growth. I'm also really concerned about impacts on neighborhood centers and parks. Neighborhood centers are not employment centers, they're not transit hubs, and they're embedded in R1 neighborhoods. I don't think we can justify the costs of the significant impacts of scale, character, safety, congestion, and SOV, single occupancy vehicle commutes without associating them with the specific desirable benefits. And if they are justifiable, I think we have to say how we're going to mitigate those impacts in specific policies and programs alongside any policy that targets growth to a particular area. Parks, I think an open-ended more housing strategy is unmanageable and completely unsustainable. If we want to promote housing growth, we have to define and manage how much. We have to commit to the physical infrastructure to support it, and that includes parks and schools, which of course takes real estate, which we don't have. So the element, I think, should include policies and programs that explore the acquisition of land for parks, require new or expanded parks in areas targeted for new development, and zone for where we can put new schools that we'll need if we add a lot of housing. I also think that we should cap commercial growth citywide and strictly limit it to small spaces that are not readily combined to serve large employers. Continued office growth, I think, just exacerbates the real estate crunch that we're looking at, and the growing lack of diversity in the type and size of our employer community, I think, poses a threat not just to our culture, but also to our economic stability. And finally, I want to support Shani's comments about the urban forest master plan, the land use definitions. I also liked Arthur's revisions to the definitions, and shading of creeks and public spaces, and incorporation of the Baylands master plan.
Thank you, Shani.
So Jen said a lot of the things I wanted to say. I want to say something about affordability. And I used to be on the board of the Housing Choices Coalition that came to talk about affordable housing for people of disadvantaged, really low income. I don't think Palo Alto can supply that unless we subsidize housing, unless Palo Alto has an internal program to actually support that kind of housing. San Jose has a lot of housing and not a lot of jobs, and people are evicted there just like here. They move from here to Sunnyvale, then to San Jose, and then next. There is just not. The market situation in this area is such that it doesn't matter how much we build, it's not going to solve the affordability program. So we do need to think about how we build it. I'm not opposed to building more housing. I think we need it. But we can't pretend that it's going to solve a problem building more, because whenever we build new housing, the old housing, where people are actually living maybe in an apartment that is not in a good shape, these guys get evicted. And I know 2 people who left Palo Alto just in the last month because they could not afford, as the buildings were being, just replacing the carpets, and hey, your rent is going up $1,000 a month. So this is not something we can solve by creating more housing. We need to solve it in other ways, and it has to be subsidized in some way if we want to keep the teacher and all these other people here. I am strongly opposed to 0 setbacks. I think we need wide setbacks with nice trees, not palm trees, but nice big trees with shade that really encourage pedestrians to come in and walk and enjoy their time. I think we should start with implementing the existing housing element, just like Heidi said, and look at that. We haven't really studied that and how that works together. And the council directions were not to find new places. They were like, maintain and strengthen the existing language supporting housing supply. So I think we need to look at what the directions were. In my comments, I put things about bird safety in buildings. I put things about parks. I put things that have to do with nature in the city. Sustainability is, to a large extent, keeping our nature in the city, and that's the urban forest master plan, creeks, setbacks for creeks, maybe habitat overlay zones like they did in North Bay Shore in Mountain View. And we need to look at tools like that. Thanks.
Thank you. Annette?
Okay, well, I really liked the last 3 speakers, and I may be an outlier, but I totally support the 50-foot height limit. Alma's not a place to do 50-high-foot buildings, especially with housings just east of Alma, and there have been several battles already with the Park Boulevard projects affecting residential just on Alma. My second priority is really to preserve the neighborhoods. Now, obviously we need more growth in housing and diversity, but I think that this should be addressed in the housing element. And if these sites are not appropriate or the types are not appropriate, then this is where the element should be modified. I wanted to comment about ADUs or second units or whatever we want to call it. This could be a creative way to get more housing, but we need to do this carefully. The devil's in the details, and much of what Arthur wrote I agree with, that we need to follow the current zoning with a little bit of tweaking. I tweaked the parking requirements which came up. No one ever uses garages anyway. We really have to watch. There are all sorts of things that are in violation. There are 2 pool houses or accessory units on my block that are being used as Airbnbs. So I am very much a concern about these tiny little units. Obviously, we want to keep our family and kids within the neighborhood, but I think it could deteriorate very rapidly, and I think we should limit the number per block so one block just doesn't have 10 and you have strange people that are coming and going all the time. Obviously, if you had a family, that wouldn't be the case. I'm also concerned about a lot of the comments in this version of the comp plan about neighborhood centers, and think we need to split CN zones from the other zoning. Edgewood's just been redeveloped. Charleston's made major changes. Midtown has over 15 owners, and any kind of change is problematic. So I'm also concerned about changing the uses in CN. I'm totally against medical office uses and maybe other neighborhood serving types of office. So we have to look at this very, very carefully. And you can see Midtown as an example of what will happen if you just grant conditional uses here and there. You'll have so many dry cleaners, nail salons, which are uses. Couple more comments. I'm against 0 setbacks, totally. And just one more thing. although it sounds really good about adding gathering spaces and bathrooms, I just can't see in CN zones, I can't support removing any parking or trees, and we have to think about carefully who would pay for it. I am for public art, trees, and kiosks.
Thank you. Len?
Thank you. I am one of the many leaders of my neighborhood association, and I take to heart the City Council's request to ask this committee to provide a wide range of ideas from citizens in this town. And I hear many things, and I try to represent as best possible the general problems that I hear on a regular basis and by a number of people. And here are some of them. People feel that so much land has been developed that they're real troubled with traffic and cut-through traffic in the circles, parking and density, and they want to promote growth and our understanding of it, but they also first want to make sure that many of these other problems are dealt with, that there's a real solution in hand to some of the other problems that are going on. It's important that the city consider the impact of land use decisions on schools, on the school district, and the residents who elect both the school board and the city council and are asked to pay for all of it. When one elective body does something, it has an impact on the other, and we as residents who vote for both and pay for both want the two bodies to talk to each other, and especially in land use decisions. As growth and redevelopment goes, we really need to follow the Grand Boulevard design guidelines to ensure pedestrian space and access, trees, setbacks, design standards, safety. And when we're designing any project, we need to apply sound and proven design and planning principles to all our projects, paying attention to open space, walkability, compatibility, and integrated design. And thank you.
Len, do you want to finish your sentence?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Doria?
Okay, so I wanted to just make a comment again about the EIR since it came up, and I am concerned, and I know members of the public and members of this group have shared concerns that it's premature, because the fifth scenario isn't even written yet. Now I just found out tonight that this fifth scenario will include the SCAP, which we haven't seen. So I think the DIR should be scrapped. I think it's way premature. I don't see that it's impossible to mix and match elements out of the 5 scenarios, one which we haven't seen, and have them not affect one another. So I don't see how the real impacts can be anticipated or mitigated. So that's my first comment. With regards to the points of consensus, I was very disappointed to see using coordinated area plans as a tool for guiding change in targeted areas. I know that a couple CAC members mentioned that, but I don't believe there was any consensus or really any opportunity for a discussion of that or what it really means. Regional collaboration on big housing issues, I don't really agree that there was consensus on that either. In general, I'm concerned that people are so happy to redevelop that they forget that every time you redevelop, you displace somebody who is already a part of this community. I live across from a mixed-use zone. I'm the beginning of the non-CN zone in my neighborhood, and I have very low-income neighbors that would never be able, with kids in the school system, that would never be able, once a building is rebuilt, to move back in. So I think we have to be careful when we decide that. I agree that we need more housing. I'm in favor of putting mixed use with retail on the bottom, no office, and how in and housing above within the current setbacks and height limit. I don't see any advantage in exceeding the 50-foot height limit. It is completely inconsistent with L5, which talks about scale and character. It will ruin our view corridors. It will shade other people's. Anytime you can say there's places to put it, but anytime you put a taller building, you're going to shade somebody's something or other. I'm completely not in favor of allowing shading on parks. There's no way to mitigate the lack of sunshine. Let's see. Oops, that went quick.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Lydia?
So with regards to sustainability, what was brought up about whether it can trump the comp plan, et cetera, I just want to make sure that staff might go back to find out from city attorney. The thing is, there is a court case that's between Sierra Club versus the Board of Supervisors, which expressly rejected a president's clause within a general plan where the issue of a president's clause was dealt with. And so I want to make sure that staff goes and takes care of this. Now, with regards to the points of consensus, I'm totally fine with promoting mix of housing within the current zone, although within the current zoning and municipal code guidelines. And I don't think we came into consensus with regards to coordinated areas, nor with the this third point, the regional collaboration, simply because we have our own problems to grapple with in terms of housing, and to take on a regional matters is just out of our it's just not there for us. In terms of retail mix, it should be addressed in the land use element and referenced in the business and economics element. Also as to have to enhance and make the retail business economically viable and healthy. The areas of further discussion, new mixed designations, I just wonder, how is it going to be policed, and then will the use be enforced? I mean, basically, we see how enforcement is today, which is why we are where we are today, in terms of retail space being forced out and office uses in. So I would like to know what kind of enforcement is there going to be, and are there going to be penalties for mixed use? I think this is for misuse. So I think these are all matters that has to give residents and people confidence that there are enforcement. Height limits, totally don't agree to go over the 50-foot line. Although if you want to place it along the 101 freeway by the frontage road, it would be a great buffer for freeway noise and also as a seawall to hinder floodwaters. Commercial growth limits, definitely a cap on the office and R&D development. It should be extended citywide, and all areas are to monitored. And I would give the exception to Stanford Research Park, because I do see that they are working on a TMA that is possibly could be successful. Housing, yeah, okay, I can go next.
Thank you. Ellen, I'm sorry.
I have summarized my reactions to the points of consensus and for further discussion on a single sheet that is on your plan. But I thought I would explain really the source of my acceptance of what you have said tonight and why I think what I do. I've had more experience in Palo Alto than anyone in this room in living in high rises and working in small business. I came out here and eventually I've always worked at a small business in Palo Alto, which I can walk to town, I can do the shopping, and it suits me as a site. It also happens to be a high rise that is a turnkey operation, and I can go away and come back. When I first went there, I was probably one of the only single people with a single income household. Everybody else was couples. The men went off to work, the women were social and stayed home there. Think how that has changed in the last 30 years. in that particular high rise, which is 101 Alma. It has lived with the changes, and today there are young families, there are lots of young people in it, and there are startups and so forth. It's a very stimulating place to live. And I ended up on the 9th floor with 5 children on my floor, and they are still very good friends. Well, now I live in Channing House, which is also a high rise, and it has many, many pluses. Actually, I have the same view of the bay that I did when I was at 101 Alma there. So I worked in a small business. It was a successful one. And I love small business because what you do every day, you can see a result, and that's exciting. And so the first thing on the points of consensus, I want you to define small business and then track it for profitability and living thing. And include this throughout the element. The suggested definition for me would be a commercial business with 25 employees or less on site in Palo Alto and dependent on customers to walk in to shop or for service. Then I'll tell you next time about the further discussion.
Thank you. Don.
So quickly, a few points of agreement and disagreement, then some comments. I was disappointed, in fact, that staff and consultants said that there was some support for mixed use and there was consensus on the coordinated area plan as a tool. I thought there was total support for mixed use, and I think that's been demonstrated today. And I agree with several speakers who say it's not clear that we had consensus on a coordinated area plan. We've recently had speakers say they were against the height. One of the things I've always liked about Palo Alto is it doesn't have the height. I truly believe from the time that I've spent in the Sustainability Committee and thinking about land use, we're going to have to find places to make compromise. And Alma is probably not the place because you probably don't want to be putting extra height on the north-south Alma kind of path. You probably want to look someplace other than that. Overall, I have to say I'm somewhat disappointed in the land use. I'm probably late to being excited about land use. Everybody else here probably thought land use was probably the key to the whole thing. Certainly Hillary did. But I would suggest that the whole element needs to go back and look at several of the definitions. For example, one of the things that when we presented the community services, they didn't like some of the parks that we had defined and told us to put some of the parks into, quote, open space. There is no definition for open space. There's a category for open space, but within that, there's no definition for open space. And I think that it should be either defined or the term should be changed. Maybe that's conservation land or something else. We talk about residential space and we talk about transit-oriented, and we talk about 2,000 feet being walkable. 2,000 feet is 800 steps. Even the seniors today are wearing pedometers so they can walk 10,000 steps a day, and we're saying that the definition has to be 800 steps. I think that we really need to look at that. I'm also, I spent time at the shuttle meeting here the other day, and the question is, we focused on, they focused on the seniors and what we're going to do with the shuttle for them. In all of this, the definitions need to be the spaces and the coordination of the spaces.
Thank you. Hamilton.
Thanks, Dan. These are my abridged comments. The City Council directed staff to come up with a 5th DIR scenario that would actually meaningfully reduce the impacts of growth and improve the quality of life. Getting into specifics, in terms of office growth, every site we build for office space is one less site for housing. It's pretty simple. Office space is the most profitable, followed by luxury housing. Redwood City is adding 2,200 apartments, and so far, they are all luxury units. Is that what we want for Palo Alto? There are currently apartments available for rent in Palo Alto today. It's just they're expensive. The City Council asked to further evaluate regulating office and R&D growth beyond Scenario 2. Thus, the current language below Program L9, limiting growth to 50,000 square feet per year, falls short and should be reduced further and expanded to cover all Palo Alto except for Stanford Research Park. Any limit should be kept in place until the jobs housing ratio reaches some predetermined target, for example, 2.5 to 1. We need a zoning designation for retail plus housing and should opportunistically convert some zoning to it. It should be very clear the City Council and the majority of Palo Altans do not support raising the 50-foot height limit in order to accommodate more office development, nor mixed-use office space buildings with office space in them. The housing element can meet its target without raising the 50-foot height limit. However, some would like to see additional story added for high-density housing near Caltrain stops, and housing element H211 proposes evaluating this. If this was to be pursued, the additional story should be used exclusively for low-income and affordable housing, not for luxury units. We need to protect low-density residential neighborhoods and not upzone them, with the exception of modest loosening of ADUs, for example, for parking. Low-density residential neighborhoods are not zoned as hotels or boarding houses, and renting out to occupants for less than 1 month should not be permitted. In general, TDRs have contributed significantly to the growth problems, so should be eliminated or reduced. I don't believe there was consensus on regional collaboration on big issues like housing. We're already 3 times the average for Santa Clara. We're just trying to get back to a tiny bit closer to the average. We certainly can't compensate for other areas. I also think basements should count towards FAR. I have other comments, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. Amy.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I heard that many people talked about the height limits, and I wanted to start from there. I make a couple points to talk about, and first and foremost is to talk about the citywide 50 feet limits. It really is a time to update this limitation, and I like to see either lifted or eliminated altogether. I also supported the mixed use to see the housing is mixed with retail or office. I really like to echo what Julia said, how fortunate we are to live in Palo Alto, that we are worrying about the good jobs coming to our regions. And when we have issues like a good engineer, we should manage it instead of just stop the engine and look back and to see where we can find comfort. Really, I think the current imbalance of housing demand and supply is a result of zoning and planning. In a way, it also impacted generation imbalance. I remember when I first moved to California 16 years ago, we are a young family, was welcomed by the neighborhood. And now I looked around my neighborhood, we are all aging. And the city can only prosper when there's a continuous influx. And that's why that we are looking to see the creating the density to accommodate all this young and energy that we desperately need. And remember, we all once young and vibrant. And specifically, I really wanted to dial into talking about the limit of the height. It is a notion that is supported by our housing elements, and it will increase this housing density and diversity. People would say, if you build, it will come. But I think this is the opportunity to use the zoning as a tool so that you incentivize. What do you do with all this extra units that when you relax the height in the building? It has to be an incentive such that when you are zoned there, it will attract the business to come. I will come back and finish my
If you want to finish your
long
sentence,
speech.
go ahead. Okay. Thank you, Bob.
Okay. I provided some written comments, and in this case, I feel if I'm last in one respect, I might also be least, because I think that so many, oh, I'm not, oh no, there's last is best. Okay. My view would be in the sustainability space that we need to increase the housing, we need to increase the allowance for height. I actually, you know, in my case, I've got daughters and sons living in this city, and there was some concern that there would be a problem with that we aren't building homes for these new folks. But I know that my kids, as they're moving in with a girlfriend or a boyfriend, just need an apartment or a place to get going, and then once they're kind of in the town, they can kind of grind their way up the tree. So I think that there's a need for smaller units. I also thought John Kelly's remarks on the, these sort of alternate dwelling units are really exciting, because you put in these little spaces kind of the salt and pepper of our community, you know, the different types of folks that move in, the people that are maybe a graduate student at Stanford, or cultural or attributes. So I hope that we don't get so monolithic that we won't allow these types of units. And generally, I don't see them bringing in a lot of transportation load. I thought Bonnie's remarks on just getting the numeric numbers, the numbers out of the policies. There's a lot of policies where they put a number in there, and I think that that's what council's role is to use their discretion rather than to be bound by a number. The other comment is, you know, as a reader, I don't know what they could do to make this land use plan be more welcoming to someone who's not a land use wonk. But it's a really hard read, and I think that somehow the logic or the brilliance that's in our, you know, trying to come forward in our land use plan is going to be lost on 95% of the readership. So with that, we'll have a chance to come back. So
Thank you, Elaine. Then Arthur.
Is this on? Okay. So I want to voice my support for mixed-use designations, and I have a couple thoughts about what to do. But I think it's important to just kind of keep this color map in mind. I think there's been some talk about mixed use possibly providing impacts, but have we ever considered the impacts of single-use land use, where you have to go from a yellow zone to a gray, to live from where you live in a yellow zone to where you work in a gray zone, to go to the red zone where you shop, to go, I mean, all of those things, when they're far apart, require a single occupancy vehicle. I would bet if we studied the carbon footprint and the greenhouse gas emissions of the people who live and work in this area versus this area, compared to somebody whose life revolves around single uses only, there'd be a significant difference. So I think it's really important to consider the positive impacts and the positive benefits, especially on from a transportation standpoint of what mixed use can do, and really incorporate that into our land use going forward, and tightly align that with the SCAP, as Bob mentioned in his sustainability comments. I think policy L10 already asks for things like live, work, retail, residential, but I think that what happens is that functionally, the way that our zoning code works doesn't really allow for that, and I think we need to really think about crafting better incentives to, as Hamilton alluded to, creating that retail residential configuration. And then there's other things that we really need to do to really bump up the number of housing units per parcel. On a 10,000 square foot parcel, and you can build a 20,000 square foot building, why are you only limited to 10 housing units if it's RM40? Why can't it be 20 smaller units or 50 smaller studios? I mean, those are the types of things we need to think about and tweak. That's limiting our ability to build more housing stock. Right now, the preference is for 800 to 1,000 square foot 2-bedroom apartments. Of course, those are going to be more expensive. They're going to be more luxury. They're going to be geared towards more families. We have a severe mismatch between the number of single studio level housing units, 4%, and the number of single person households, 17%. I mean, if more of these people could be living in single uses and allowing those other places for, extended families or, different groupings, I think we'd have more parity. I think in one of my previous comments I said we should go back to the future. I actually think we should really look forward to the past. Mixed uses were kind of common. So were no height limits. As long as I've been alive, there's been a height limit. So I think we really need to think about looking forward to what we did before, the way that we built communities, 50, 70, 100 years ago.
Thank you. Arthur.
Thank you. First, in order to avoid redundancy, I agree with the comments of Alex, Jen, Shanae, Annette, Len, Doria, Lydia, and Hamilton. Secondly, for what Bonnie said about housing in commercial zones, I hope she doesn't mean going back to replacing ROLM kind of zone in West Bayshore, which became housing not near services. East Meadow Circle that became housing not near services. That's not the kind of thing I think we want to go back to. I think that's a mistake. Secondly, we've been waiting for a coordinated area plan for South El Camino Real that has much, much, much higher priority than San Antonio Road, which was already mostly dealt with in the East Meadow Circle concept plan, and so we should really just keep with that. Secondly, I do think the second thing we need to have a concept area plan is for Fry's, because that's a major area that's being redeveloped. That's it, nowhere else. That's all we need. Secondly, the issue is in terms of schools. We build housing. What is the impact of that on our schools? The school district did a projection, and based on extending their projection out to 2030, their projection is flat school enrollment growth based on half of the production of housing units that are projected in the lowest scenario of the DEIR. So there's a mismatch here. We have to figure out where we're going to put the students, and simply cramming more bodies into into existing schools is what creates the bullying we're trying to deal with, mental health issues we're trying to deal with, because there's not limited place for them to play. The next issue is, I think that we need to think about adaptive growth management. I agree that we should not lock in 50,000 square feet, but I think that what we need to do is have an automatic system based on accurately measurable impacts. And based on those impacts, we either adjust up the amount of growth or adjust down the amount of growth based on dealing with those impacts. And it needs to be adaptive to that. I agree with the idea of economic diversity, but as was pointed out by Elaine, economic diversity really is going to happen by smaller units. The issue, and it's also going to, interestingly enough, we have starter homes that used to exist in Palo Alto. They're rapidly being torn down and replaced by larger homes that are not affordable anymore. Not even, even people with with high incomes can get them. So we need to think about how these replacement of these homes, of starter homes, are being replaced and basically making Palo Alto even less affordable than it would be otherwise.
Thank you. I'll go, and then we'll start over again.
Or do we want to put up our tag?
We'll do that, yeah. Okay. I find myself agreeing with at least something that all of you have said. And it's different from person to person. A couple of comments. First of all, on the consensus piece, this was a nit, but I noticed that basements were added as a point of consensus. I did not hear that at all. And I think that was around the topic of groundwater and basements in residential homes. Some of you probably know that I'm working with Keith Bennett on Save Palo Alto's Groundwater to present the city alternative ways of dealing with basements. I do agree with staff, however, that preservation of groundwater is something that deserves our attention and should be in the natural element of the comp plan. I disagree with my co-chair, who just walked away, that I think that the importance of coordinated area plans is that the way that the comp plan was structured previously was for a much different city, and many of the statements are very broad in that they talk about the city as though it's the same across the entire place. It'll talk about varied neighborhoods, but it doesn't talk about all the neighborhoods, and it talks about parking in very general sorts of ways. Our city does not operate that way. There are differences between block and block. There are differences between one side of a street and another side of the street. And the only way that we can address that is through coordinated area plans. And so I think we should have not only the ones that Arthur has described, but also others as well. And the ones that the staff has supported, I think, is important to do. I don't know if there's consensus around that or not, but that is my feeling. Regarding Arthur's suggestion of dynamic impacts and dynamic ways of managing impacts, I am fully on board with that. I think that is a very important and a really interesting way for us to explore and try and find a solution to. On height, I am a supporter of the city challenging the 50-foot height limit. Some years ago, I spoke with Larry Klein, who is somewhat to my surprise, the council member in the 70s that was the proponent and brought forward the 50-foot height limit. I asked him at that time what the logic of that number was. And it was not, there was no logic that tied it to transportation or real, I guess I'll finish that comment later. There wasn't any logic that was applied to that number. That number was picked out of the air as a way to demonstrate how strongly the city opposed the very tall office buildings that were going up and were being planned 50 years ago. Mission accomplished, by the way. I am not opposed to a height limit, but I need to understand what the impact of that height limit does, what its impacts are, and importantly, what its potential benefits are. And that, I think, is something that we can discuss and can study and study further if we need to. Okay. May I have, did you have a process question?
Yeah, I have a point of order, which is, instead of just going around again, I was hoping at some point we'd actually talk about like specific issues and have some kind of a dialogue. Is there a different way to structure it than just go around the room again?
I'm happy to entertain a suggestion.
I'm not sure I have the perfect answer, but maybe it's topic based. I don't know what.
Well, so let's throw out a couple of topics. Height might be one. Yes, hands, height. I'm seeing a majority there. Somebody give me another topic. Coordinated area plans. Growth limits.
Somehow, some kind of dynamic feedback.
Meaning, I'm sorry, you're talking about what Arthur was describing? Okay. Arthur?
I think that if we basically go topic at a time, which we can do, and everybody raises their hands, we're not going to be able to cover more than one topic. So I'm wondering, I think some of the issues are out there, whether some of this can be done through straw polls. For example, height limit. I don't think that having more of a discussion is going to be helpful. If we just had a straw poll, how many people are in favor of keeping the 50-foot height limit? How many people are in favor of increasing that? And more than simply the housing element has. The housing element has in it a mention of the height limit. I'm talking about, other than the housing element, how many people are in favor of increasing the height limit beyond that? And I think that maybe it's a straw poll.
One moment. I understand. Let me just continue getting a list of the topics that we might talk about, and then we'll see if we can work out a mechanism here. Annette?
CN zones and specific uses in a CN zone.
Doria?
I have a general concern that there's too many places in the comp plan where they say things like update this, or there are things that I feel we should be talking about that somebody somewhere in the future is going to be doing, and it doesn't say who. And the C zones is one of them. It says update the use definitions for the C zones. Like, who's going to update it and when? Shouldn't we be talking about that? Those are very essential land use questions, and there's a bunch of other places where there are statements such as that.
Thank you. Alex?
I guess one topic would be sort of what's the vision or the end goal of the affordable housing discussion. So what are we trying to achieve through affordable housing as it connects to what kind of units we're actually thinking about?
Steve?
I'd like to discuss microphone. I have a process question. I like Arthur's suggestion of a straw poll. I heard the room. I think height limits is 1210 one way or another. I don't know what to do with that. I think there are a lot of items that I don't call 1210 a consensus.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm interested in the process and the reporting of this.
You're interested in the
But
discussion.
I do support the straw poll idea.
Yeah. So forgive me, Steve, just so I understand, you're suggesting that do the straw poll, but don't eliminate discussion around it?
Well, you asked for issues. One issue I have is an issue of process and reporting. If we have an 18-2 vote, I can see saying we have a consensus, but what if we have closer votes?
We should record the votes.
Yeah.
The number. But I had something. I wanted to use the questions as exploratory. So I actually don't think your height limit questions are detailed enough. I mean, I think you want to ask a bunch of questions so that we can really tease out where there's consensus and where there's still disagreement.
So let me get to Elaine and then Amy.
I just wanted to add discussion of housing and the housing site since it's coming up on Monday, and if there's going to be a contingent here going to council, there should be something for them to report back or just have. I mean, I would like to, housing sites is one thing, but I think the other thing just generally is just the discussion of housing and opportunities to facilitate housing projects.
Let me come back to that, but I've written it down. Shani?
Me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Amy, and then Shani.
So I actually wanted to support Steve's suggestion that when we support a subject, that there is a reason that we support it, and I think it's worthy of a discussion, and because it will lead to the other subject that why that we support it, and also I wanted to talk about housing affordability.
Shani?
I think it's probably going to be a lot of it in consensus anyway, but I still want to mention some of the issues around parks and creek corridors and sea level rise and the things that have to do with nature and sustainability.
Doria and then Arthur.
I had another concern, and it's a new policy under L18, and it refers to the rail corridor study. As far as I know, we were never given the rail corridor study, and I doubt there's very many people here that have read it. So I don't think we should be making decisions on things that we have no idea what they say. So until there is a discussion about what the rail corridor study contains, its map, et cetera, I think we should strike that from or staff should give us the rail corridor study.
Understood. Okay. But sorry, Arthur, then let's see if we can pull this together.
So the consultant suggested that one of the topics that was brought up by the Sustainability Committee that we haven't looked at is moving the airport from the train station to the land use, so that we should probably explore. The next thing is that I think that part of the idea of understanding where there's consensus and where there's disagreement is that we can get to the pros and cons of the disagreement. And where we get consensus, we can basically try to get better consensus along that line. And that's why I think that the use of straw polls in order to be able to figure out, and people have commented last time that we didn't do straw polls in transportation, so maybe we should do them early on this. And even though the topics are, the issue of height is not necessarily clearly defined, I think that there's pretty clear people, from my point of view, other than the suggestion in the housing element about the consideration of certain areas in which how the height limit of 50 feet might be increased. The broad area of, in general, do you want to keep the 50-foot height limit? Or do you, in general, would you like to breach the 50-foot height limit more broadly than is in the housing element, is a pretty focused question. And I think that if we ask that question, we can then see what the breakdown is, and then people could provide their comments, which might be done offline rather than taking the pros and cons, rather than taking the time now to do that, because we basically don't have much time. We have a little over an hour left.
Can you just separate the height limit to commercial versus residential? Don't put them together, like for office versus.
So let's not get into this just right here. What I would like is a proposal for how we should, if we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, potentially 7 topics here, and I'm going to suggest that we drop out 4. That would give us, nominally 40 minutes or 10 minutes-ish each to discuss each one, and or take a poll and discuss, or just take polls or whatever. But does someone have a proposal for how we might organize those 7 or so topics? Annette?
Well,
yes.
My comment is, that's good to prioritize them, but if we're going to be talking about land use for a while, we could do part tonight and part next time.
That is a good point. I was going to here are all of them again, and I have to read my writing here. Height limit, coordinated area plans, growth limit, dynamic management, the specific uses within a CN zone, update, who does the updates, vision of affordable housing and housing sites, housing affordability, nature and sustainability topics, rail corridor study. I would suggest that the topic of housing and housing sites, we strike that because we're going to end up with a contingent that goes to the city. And so there's another opportunity for us to talk about that, or at least for that group to talk about that, and take input on that.
So will that go to the next session then?
I don't know the answer to that.
Well, we're not prepared, and we're not agendized for that.
The update, who does, and the rail corridor studies, I think those are important pieces, but they are somewhat procedural, and we can get staff to address those directly. The CN zones, the specific uses within the CN zones, happy to entertain it. But I think those, so it's actually just 3 that I was suggesting we drop out, so there's actually 8 topics there. Don? That's a very good point. Amy?
And would you suggest that other subjects that we are not going to discuss, that we submit a written report or something? I actually wanted to talk about the historical resources too. I know that it's not like a hot topic.
What I'm trying to do is save a little bit of time at the end so that if there are, as a catch-all, and as Annette has mentioned, we have one more meeting where we can discuss things. But I think I'm supportive of the idea that we try and see if we can focus in on a couple of these topics. Arthur.
So my suggestion on the way to operate is part of the reason for voting, even though the questions may not be completely effectively drawn, is so that we can see how the positions lay more or less. And part of the issue is that I think that we'll be able to cover very little of it today. But if we can frame the topic as what are the real issues, and then people can, in preparation for the next meeting, provide written materials that can then be, thoughtfully analyzed and brought to us at the next meeting, so that we can address those more carefully in written materials rather than just orally. And so I think that we don't have enough time to deal with it, but voting allows us to see how much consensus or lack of it there is.
So here's my suggestion, and that is that we'll go through these in the order that they were listed. I'm going to ask the person that made the suggestion to frame the conversation, and if they can, frame a a straw poll, and then we'll create some discussion around there. We'll allow discussion to occur for about 8 minutes, something like that. Okay, Robin? So the first one was height limits. That was me. And I'm going to do this really simply. And I think Arthur actually had the right wording, which was, can I just see a show of hands of those that would prefer that the city not have any policy that goes over 50 foot? Or, and then I'll ask for a show of hands for those that will allow, and then we can have discussion about the nuances within that. All right? So a show of hands for those that do not. Yes, I'm going to ask for a show. Raise your hand.
People want to keep the 50-foot height limit.
How many people would like to keep the 50-foot height limit? A show of hands. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And a show of hands for those that would like to exceed the 50-foot height limit for any reason. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Sorry, I just lost count because I realized I can't count you two. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm sorry? Leave your hands up for a moment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 with myself. Okay. So let's, for the next 8-ish minutes here. I'm sorry? Oh, undecided. Good point. Just one undecided? Just Len? Okay. So if you would use your cards, let's take some conversation. Hamilton.
I was hoping you could do essentially, I like the idea of straw polls. I think they're great. Essentially, keep going on the straw poll for height. In other words, do you support the housing element, right? The second one is, do you support raising the height limit for housing? Do you support raising the height limit for housing only to help with low income and affordable housing? Do you want to raise the housing for luxury units? Do you want to raise the height limit for office? And so we can get a feel of where the people who are support it. Because I think that would be very informative to this discussion.
So give me 3 of those.
I just gave you.
Just state them right now, and just
Okay.
because I'm not going to get.
Do you support housing element 211, which is raising the height limit near Caltrain stops for high density housing to add, let's say, an additional floor? I think everyone who voted for
So
height is
near
probably-
Caltrain, an additional floor.
Right, but that is a housing element, and one of the housing element actually says evaluate. So a straw poll will help inform that. The second one is, do you support it?
So wait, let's just vote.
Okay.
How many support that? Oh, you want to repeat it one more time?
Sure. Do you support implementing housing element item H211, which is raising the height limit for high density housing within a quarter of a mile of the Caltrain stops? No, density within half a mile, height within a quarter of a mile.
Now you've got too many elements in the question.
We should incorporate the numbers.
Just.
Well, this is the existing policy that's been.
Yeah, Hamilton, can you just do it more simply, in some way?
Do you support high density housing close to the Caltrain stops over the height limit?
By 1 floor.
Above the 50-foot height limit.
Okay. Yes or no? But I don't want to vote on the policy. I want to vote on the concept.
If you're voting on concepts, I would say that we should be allowed to participate in the conversation.
I'll just read you the definition of a straw poll, which is an unofficial ballot conducted as a test of opinion.
Tell you what,
It's
I
not
will
like a vote
track
vote.
your votes separately.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry, can I just make an amendment, which is instead of specifying.
Can you be on microphone, please?
Instead of specifying a specific height, just vote on the concept of increasing height.
That's fine.
Okay.
I want to get through this vote.
Do you want to try it again? Try it again.
Do you support raising the height limit for housing within close to the Caltrain stops.
Affordable or not?
It doesn't say
Yeah.
affordable.
Raise your hand if you support that. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, of which 2 are our representatives. And now opposed to that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And undecided.
Dan, this is not helpful to me because it seems to me the devil's in the details is just, I mean, I could go on, but it's just so generic that it's a yes/no vote, and it doesn't really, I mean, there might be in this case or that case or this location or that location. So
I think you're absolutely right, but I think what the intent here is to try and get a feel for where we are, and then we can have some conversation about some of the nuance, I'm hoping, before we run out of time entirely this evening.
Yeah, but let's try and move through this voting a little faster. So, do you want undecided?
So there was, I was asking if there were undecideds. We had Lennon, Alex, and Hamilton. That's 3. Was there 3?
Okay. Can I ask my next question?
Yeah, go.
Okay. Do you support raising the height limit in all the commercial districts above 50 feet for housing?
All in favor? All commercial districts.
Yeah.
For housing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
What's a commercial center?
I don't know. Cal Avenue University. Yeah.
No, but you got to know that. And it's not consistent in the definition.
So we thought straw polls were going to be really easy.
I know.
Just as a reminder.
The thing I wanted to flush out is, so let me tell you where I wanted to go with this. I wanted to find out whether people supported housing, raising the height limit, for example, for luxury housing. Did they, how far did they want to raise the height limit? Where did they want to raise the height limit? Maybe straw polls aren't the best way, but I kind of wanted to flush out sort of how far people were willing to go with this.
So, Robin, how much more time do we have?
3 minutes.
So let's abandon any more straw polls for the moment on this topic, on the height limit here, and let's just open it up for some other comments. I have Amy, I have Bonnie, I have Annette, I have Doria. Amy, go.
So I hear that we are trying to define why we wanted to have this high limit, and I hear that is it going to be affordable? Is it going to be luxury? Luxury is it doesn't sound like welcoming here, and I think that we need to have discussions to say what it is.
Thank you, Bonnie. Then Annette.
The reason it's very important to have as much ability to build affordable or maybe medium housing in as infill high buildings is so you can have more parkland. I mean, you guys who are saying we need more parks, et cetera, if you want the parks, if you want the space, then you put the housing someplace else so that there's room for the parks. You can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want more housing and more parks, if you use parks and those kinds of things as a barrier to housing, then we're going against what we heard all this evening about how important it is to have housing. So that's why you really have to consider in appropriate places where it isn't going to create too much shade and all that kind of thing, to consider raising the height limit and not to be, and remember what Larry Klein said, it was just the 50 feet was just pulled out of the air and was not based on any reality. So let's be flexible and keep in mind, everybody here, we're not creating a new ordinance that's going to be effective tomorrow. We're talking about a plan for the next, starting in now to the next 20 years. And that's why we have to talk on a higher level. And let's not get hung up about the details. Let's be able to craft policies that are really broad. And I'll shut up.
Thank you, Annette, and then Doria, and then Steve.
Well, for me, the issue is the Manhattanization of Palo Alto. And so that's really it in a nutshell. I think everything is becoming supersized. We supersize our houses as far as the density. People are building these very large places. We change the height in residential from 30 to 35 feet if you just do the slope of the roof a little bit different. We are going out with every building we can to the maximum FAR. And for me, you go down these streets, you don't see sunlight, you don't see views, you don't see anything. It's just a supersized city that is making it not very pleasant to live in. And I understand the need for housing, but, at some point, we're never going to have enough housing. We're never going to have the right type of housing. We can strive to move forward, but these very large structures make it very undesirable, at least for many of the people that I hear from in South Palo Alto. And I could go on, but I'll stop.
Thanks. Doria.
So,
Then Steve.
at a high level, I do not believe that people moved here because they want to live in a city that has canyon-like structures like downtown Chicago. And I don't believe that the 50-foot height limit was arbitrary, but we can go back in time and check it. I agree with Annette, and I think that, building all the housing in the world is not going to control the housing price. So the idea that building more housing will make the housing stock more affordable is not correct. I think the 50-foot height limit is a good thing to stick with. We already have negative impacts from growth that we have not mitigated, so I do not think we should be considering more growth until we mitigate the present negative impacts. And I don't think that we can ever achieve jobs, housing parity. So what is the point of ruining the quality of life for everyone here for something that is unachievable, which is that every person on the planet gets to pile in to live in Palo Alto? So I don't think it's desirable, and I think we should provide as much housing stock as we can instead of office building under the present height limits. And I think mixed use in the C zones is a really great idea, and understand that already there are other municipal code that affect how tall things can be. For instance, when you approach a residential zone within 150 feet, nothing can be higher than the residential height. So there's it's more complicated than just say put it here. Some of the C zones are one block, so it's actually impossible unless you get rid of the protection for the residential zone next to it. So I think people need to think about it in a little broader sense.
All right, Steve, I'm going to, with my co-chair's permission, allow our conversation to continue on here a little bit. Steve, followed by Shannon.
I'd like to be able to build another Channing house or two if we need it. I've lived across the street. I lived in visual range. I can see the mark out in my backyard. For 35 years, I lived in visual range of the 525 University building. They are all downtown in appropriate places. Those height in Channing House allows, as Bonnie said, a set of amenities. It may also contribute money for parks, but you can't have those amenities in a smaller building. We're taking it away from people who are here already. In answer to Hamilton's question, I probably wouldn't raise the height limit for $2 million condos, but I might raise the height limit for some very expensive condos if 4 or 5 stories, because I raised the height limit, were devoted to below market or affordable housing. So it's not an either or question for me.
Thank you. Shani, then Hamilton.
I think as part of the mix, we need to also provide some taller buildings. But I think we have to be very, very careful about where they're placed and not like unlimited. So I think Stanford Research Park, maybe some taller buildings don't look horrified. That's not a lot of residences, so maybe there will be less opposition. But I don't see that it's impossible to have some taller houses, but they have to have a lot of units available for people of less of means. And I don't know if affordable, because, you know, I meet affordable people that live in affordable housing in my community at the dog park, Arthur, you know, some of those people. One is a doctor at the Palo Alto Medical, the other one works at high-tech, at one of the computer companies, and they live in below market rate. I don't know exactly how that works, but it seems like the below market rate is really not aimed at those that really, really need it. And so I want to find that solution. I don't know how to do that, but I would think that we can provide some of those taller buildings if we could get seriously below market rate or really affordable for low-income people.
Thank you. Hamilton, and then, I'm sorry? Oh, sorry. Okay. Arthur, and then Elaine.
So I wish that the trade-off that Bonnie suggested of tall buildings means you get parks were the case. We might possibly get money for parks, but the city doesn't spend that money on parks. If we built new Channing houses, tall buildings like Channing, where's the land that would become parks that's around Channing House? It doesn't exist. Mountain View has big pieces of land that they can redevelop. And the Palo Alto Medical Foundation, when it was downtown, had land that was developable, and we got Heritage Park out of it. But there was a lot of development elsewhere that didn't happen. That happened without tall buildings. So I don't see that tall buildings means we get parks. I think tall buildings just means we get more crowding. And so I do have concerns about that. I do think that there's one thing that makes some sense in terms of slight height increases. And that is, if with the 50-foot height limit downtown, there's a small problem that might benefit from a tweak. And that is 4 stories in 50-foot height means essentially that you don't have good heights for retail. So I think that a slight tweak that we might want to consider is have 55-foot height limit downtown for we limit of only 4 stories, in which you can have a little bit more height for retail, which I think makes retail a little bit more viable, and 2 stories, possibly 2 stories of office, and 1 story of housing on top. I'm very concerned that just as there's houses around town that are used by office use. Startups rent housing. Like there's one of the food distributing places that the city of Palo Alto uses, in fact, is located in a house in College Terrace. I don't know how we prevent the housing units built downtown from being used as cheap office space, and I'm very concerned about that. I don't know how we answer that. But the other thing is that there's been a proposal around that we build housing units, and I agree with building small housing units, but that somehow we don't need parking if we build housing units near transit. If that were the case, why do we have so much parking problems elsewhere, downtown, around downtown? I think that the issue is that unless there's a demonstrated need that people don't park, then I think we need to require parking for our housing. And so I disagree with the part of it that says that you can build, people just won't have cars. No, they'll park them somewhere, and the demonstration from Portland where they experimented with housing without parking shows that did not work in Portland. And Portland has much better transit than we have in Palo Alto. The transit we have is pitiful. I'll address one other issue that somebody brought up, which is the idea that we need walkability to mean more than 200 feet. 2,000 feet. Well, I think that, certainly people take 10,000 steps. I'm not sure how, some people do. I'm not sure how many of them take them all at one time. But if you are dragging a bag of groceries home from Whole Foods and you live a half a mile away, I'm not sure how many people can carry that bag of groceries a half a mile. No, but and you can only carry 1 bag of groceries in your backpack, so there's an issue there. Not necessarily people will necessarily walk. Some of them will drive to Whole Foods. Some of them will drive somewhere. And I think that the issue is walkability is usually defined as quarter a mile in some scenarios, a half a mile in some scenarios. I think the people, and I think that we need to be careful about increasing that dramatically in a way that doesn't create a walkable neighborhood. So I think we need to be careful about that. So I'll close there.
Elaine, then Julia.
So I think, yes, we do have an urban growth boundary that we've pretty much exhausted. But I think, we can still upcycle. And no one's talking about the Manhattanization of Palo Alto. A 4, 5, 6-story community is not Manhattan. It's more like Brooklyn. It's more like Beacon Hill or Back Bay or Lincoln Park. I mean, wonderful, wonderful neighborhoods that we have all across this country. Actually, that's kind of how Palo Alto started out, 2, 3, story buildings along, a couple of gridded streets. And, here or on University and also in Cal Ave. And I mean, I think this it's a pretty good model that I think lots of cities around the world have. We still have room to grow. I think it's just a question of how we grow it. There's actually only one residential structure on University Avenue, and that's the Hotel President, which was converted from a hotel to residential use. But there's nothing else on University. There's also a lot of one-story structures on University that, for which there's opportunity because of its location. I think that back in 1971, I think Palo Alto passed some inclusionary zoning for affordable housing, and they got lauded for it. But I think what we've seen de facto for the last 30, 40 years, pretty much as long as I've been alive, since we've changed a lot of the zoning downtown, imposed the height limits, we've seen a lot of exclusionary zoning. And what I really would hate for us to do is to make the choice to create a land use element that is basically exclusive of the community, of future people, of the people who grew up here but can no longer stay here. I think if we have an opportunity to upcycle some of our precious land, make room for certain populations, and this is at all income levels. We're not talking just about subsidized housing for very low income people. I think we're losing the character of small business people. We're losing the character of professionals. We're losing the character of young people because they're just an endangered species. I think we need to really start, creating that holistic, vibrant, diverse community that we used to have. And if we have an opportunity to build, 5 stories of housing, 6 stories of housing, where there's currently 1 story of retail and nothing else, I think we should try to examine that opportunity. I don't think that it's a terrible thing for us to try to do. I mean, I think the terrible thing for us to do is to be an exclusionary community, pull up the drawbridge and say, whoever's here is here, and we got what we got, so that's what you have. I just don't think that's how our community has been. We've been very inclusive. We've been very accommodating for the whole of our history, and I would like to see us move down that path, continue moving down that path.
Julia, Alex, Jennifer.
I just wanted to say, I think that, like Elaine said, I think we obviously aren't talking about adding tall buildings everywhere in Palo Alto. I think everyone here seems to be on the same page that we want to do it in a very strategic way. And so I think we need to realize that and know that we do want to protect areas with single family homes. And it sounds like there are a lot of people here that would be okay with raising the housing height limit for specific groups, and so I think we should focus more on that. I think adding senior citizen housing, adding small unit housing, that does help with adding families into the community, because senior citizens are then not living in houses that they are bigger than they need and are living in a better facility. Having super small units I would expect would help with programmer housing. I don't know if that's term, but having houses that families could be using, instead not having to group roommates together and a family could rent. So everything does work together. And I also agree that by adding a ton of housing, it doesn't change the price of individual houses. I don't think anyone is naive enough to think that by Palo Alto adding 10,000 houses or housing units, our prices are going to be be smaller, but we are part of a regional community, and I think it is the place of all of us in all of the communities around here to continue to add housing and work together.
Alex, Jennifer, Lydia, and then Ellen, and then that's the end I've got. So Alex first.
Just in terms of aesthetics, it's interesting if you want to see what it looks like to change it. You could drive around California Avenue, and on Sherman, they're building a new 4-story building where there was a 1-story building. And then there was a new 3 or 4-story building that has like Tableau software on California Avenue. Used to be where the theater was or whatever. It just, if you imagine all of California going even to 3 or 4 stories, that is a huge change, I would say, in the character. And so those are all at about 50 feet. And I can't imagine wanting to see Cal Ave with buildings over 4 stories or 5 stories. And so I think there's a fundamental problem here. I think even when Elaine was talking about the certain cities, the problem I have is we're not a city like that. We are a suburb. Everyone likes to talk about Palo Alto as a city, but fundamentally it's a suburb. It's a suburb that happened to be at the epicenter of a technological revolution. And everybody likes that suburb, but you fundamentally can't make it a city by just converting it into a city. And so I think there's some pressure now that because of what's happened and because there are these jobs here, of which I think Palantir is right now is a huge, one of the main players in that and bringing people into the city. There's no sort of plan for how to bring these two together. My last comment is just that, oh shoot, I knew I should have written it down. Getting too old. What was it? All right, whatever. All right, go ahead.
So I support the height limit, but I think that I could very likely be convinced to support exceptions to the height limit in particular circumstances. That would not include for commercial office. It would not include a blanket height extension in an entire district. I would rather have it, or all of our transit districts, if I could be presented with an idea that if we, either on a project by project basis, I could support extensions, or if we could say if we add 1 story or 2 stories in this area, we have the ability to control that there'll be smaller units or there'll be a minimum number of smaller units. I might be convinced there. So I think the devil really is in the details in figuring out what exactly you're getting for giving up that height impact, which I think is a significant impact. Alex.
Can I mention my last thought?
Go.
Oh, I forgot again. Just kidding. I just think I haven't seen any modeling or I think people talk about that somehow we could produce this affordable housing and with creating some number of different units. I'd like to see an example. I'd like someone to produce a model where by introducing a certain number of units, they brought the median price of housing down. I've not seen it, and I would dare someone to produce it, because to bring down the median price of housing in this city, it's going to take an incredible amount of units. That's it.
Okay, we have Lydia and then Ellen, then we've exhausted everyone that has spoken. There are a couple of people that would like to speak twice. We're almost to 8 o'clock here. We do want to leave at 8:30. Lydia, then Ellen.
So I hear Bonnie say that, go beyond the 50, don't be all looking at it at a narrow focus, don't need to delve into the details. However, without delving into details, we see what has happened with our city. Frankly, today we're at this housing crisis because of aspirational goals and a less than stellar way of policing how we go about approving projects, especially when we're supposed to have a balance of housing and jobs. It's been going on one end, And so now we're supposed to catch up. And it's an aspirational goal to say, let's raise the 50-foot limit in order to house everybody that comes into our city. That's not going to happen. And so while I agree with what Julia said, that yes, our city is evolving, we also have issues today that we have to look at before we go around with aspirational goals of raising our heights in order to put more housing in. I mean, it's just common sense, or is that just way too common that we just can't comprehend it? Then lastly, we don't need to go 5 or 6 stories. A 1-story building, if you make it a 4-story, we already have extra housing there. So why is it that we have to go way over? Why not see what we can do with what we already have? Anyway, that's it.
Ellen?
My concern is for all the service and small business that a vibrant community needs to have in the community. And what are you going to do with the employees and the owners of those small businesses? They have to get to work and back. And so the days when, let's say, the people lived above their shops, or the whole family lived above the restaurant that they have, you're eliminating so many businesses. The shoe shine man, or a little shoe shop, where is he to live, and where are his employees to be able to come? The crucial problem right now, incidentally, at Channing House is our inability to hire employees in order to do the serving of the meals, the cleaning, and they do not have adequate parking for it. And people turn you down all the time, say no, they won't take the jobs. And you can't survive without having a certain amount of services that need to have housing, and they have transportation problems which are acute. And I think that I don't have any objection to having mixed housing or mixed housing with income levels there. I mean, it's certainly true at 101 Alma now. There are no desperately poor people, but there are a range of incomes and families depending on where they are on life's ladder and what their objectives are. So I think the housing situation is much more bigger than you remember, because you don't live in a place which depends on so many low-level, low-income residents.
Okay, we're just past 8 o'clock. Amy and Elaine, you guys have already spoken once. If I may, I'd like to move on. I'd like to do one quick attempt at a straw poll regarding the airport. Would those of you that would support moving the airport from the transportation element into the land use element, please raise your hand. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay, we're done with that. How many would like to keep it in the transportation element? I'm not seeing any hands. Are any undecided? Okay, 2. Good. Now, the other items that we had listed here, and I think we're only get through one, so I'm going to try a straw poll on which one we are going to choose. The ones that we have on the list are coordinated area plans, conversation about dynamic management of growth limits, a vision of affordable housing, which is combined with the housing affordability topic, nature and sustainability, and it's really those 4, or those 5. So let me ask, get a show of hands of how many would like to take the next several minutes and talk about coordinated area plans. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many?
Repeat all of them one more time.
Yeah, of course. Coordinated area plans.
Yes.
Yes. Coordinated area plans, dynamic management of growth limits, vision of affordable housing, or the topic of affordable housing probably more generally, and then nature and sustainability, Shani's topic that she had brought up. So we had 7 people who were voting to talk about coordinated area plans. How many would like to talk about dynamic growth management? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How many would like to vote to talk about affordable housing? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And how many would like to talk about nature and sustainability? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, I thought I already counted you, but we'll call that 5. Okay, so 14. Yes, thank you. I didn't get a chance to do that. So the big winner here is affordable housing. We are going to give ourselves 20 minutes. That'll give us 5 minutes to wrap up. I have the following speakers: Lydia, Hamilton, Amy, Elaine, Arthur, Lisa, Bonnie, Shani, Annette, Doria. Lydia, go.
So I think in terms of housing, first I think it's most important to define what is affordable. I mean, that's why everybody comes to council, comes to others and say, I want affordable housing. So is it the nationally defined very low income, moderate income? What is it? Is it the below market, the BMRs? Or is it just simply someone who works in Palo Alto and just wants to live in Palo Alto, but does not want to pay Palo Alto prices and is demanding a rent that they're willing to pay? So I think that in an effort to understand what affordable is, I think to focus, it's more important to build sensibly and purposely what the demographic that we see is needed here in the community. So one, I would say teachers, small retail business owners, service workers, clerical workers, city staff, tradespeople, nurses. Then for seniors with children with disabilities. And then 3, homeless. Some of this are going to will need to be subsidized. However, it needs to be focused and purposeful if we're going to help these people.
Thank you. Hamilton, then Amy.
I agree with Lydia. Let me give you an example. I live right near Edgewood Plaza, and they just put in 10 townhomes, and each of those townhomes sells for $3 million, and they all sold like that. So what I'm really concerned about is we're all talking about housing here, and left to free market, those will all be luxury units, guaranteed. So the only thing that's not going to be luxury units is what is required by ordinance or law. That's why in Redwood City, all the units are luxury units, and essentially they're gentrifying it. So we will be actually going in the opposite direction of our goal if we're building more of these $3 million townhomes or $2 million condos. So I just want us to be thoughtful, if we are committed to this objective, that we come up with a policy that actually allows us to move in that direction and achieve our goal instead of just making more units for very wealthy folks to live conveniently.
Thank you. Amy, then Elaine.
Thank you. For affordable housing, I think it is important that we have to use zoning as a tool. Right now, I think the imbalance of the supply and demand that we are seeing in Palo Alto really is a result of a past planning and the zoning. And when we talked about the height limitation, I think that we missed the point. The point is that we are here trying to increase the housing stock. And the reason we are increasing it is because it's not because that we wanted to do it, it's because that there is a demand, there's a need, that the population is growing. Just without anybody coming in, we have our own family, we have our own children. That is the nature of the population growth. And therefore, the zoning is a tool to negotiate and to see how we can place people at different places. We all read that Mountain View, zoned for this 12-story high rises with a lot of strings attached. But who is going to build it? And therefore, there has to be negotiated room that the builder will be willing to build it, because a zone meaning just that you are creating a possibility for somebody to make it happen. And I think for the affordability, we wanted to protect a class, for example, the teachers that need to live here to see the students that they educate, and also those people with disabilities. They need to be mingled into this a large community. And also, I really think I'm scoring a brown points here with our city employees. These people need to live here, so that they know when we go ask for permits and that they understand what is the issue. And so that is the extra housing that we wanted to provide for people who make a lot of money that ordinary cannot compete with the people that we see that are moving in today that make a lot of money. And that is the affordable housing I think that we wanted to provide.
Thank you. Elaine, then Arthur.
So I think with this discussion, with housing and affordable housing, we kind of need an let's throw everything at it approach to make things, a lot of people, to make things much more affordable. Yes, that probably means way too many units, but the problem is we've sort of dug ourselves a really big hole. When my family moved to the Bay Area in 1988, we moved from suburban DC, and already the price of housing here was 2x suburban DC, which was not a cheap place by any stretch of the imagination. I think around that same time, I think Palo Alto's housing, the average house in Palo Alto was something like 2.5, 3 times the national average, and now it's about 10.5 times. So our price is getting more and more expensive, and by doing that, we're basically creating a smaller and smaller, wealthier pool of people who can buy into this community or be a part of it. I think we need to start thinking about dialing this back. And so affordability should not be 10x the national average. I don't know if it should be 2x the national average, which is where it was about 30, 40 years ago. But we need to start turning the dial back and really kind of moving that back. And that really does include housing supply. The Legislative Analyst's Office of California issued a really important report. They talked about all of California, all of the coastal communities collectively building a shortfall of hundreds of thousands of housing units. It's just California. People are attracted to coming here, and it's not our community, it's not just Mountain View, it's not just Sunnyvale, it's not just San Jose and Gilroy, it's all of California. We're probably one small drop in the bucket, but we're sort of the harbinger. I mean, we're like the poster child of lack of supply gone awry because our housing costs are so high. So in this conversation about affordable housing, it's probably true that we can't build enough units in the next 15 years to really make a huge dent in rent. But we need to start thinking about turning the dial back, because in the 60s, a car mechanic could live here and raise a family, or an accountant with a small business could live here and raise a family and buy a house. But those folks have long haven't been able to do so for a very long time. I heard someone tell me that they heard in a coffee shop it takes 2 exits, meaning 2 sales of major companies now in order to afford a house in Palo Alto. That's kind of ridiculous, and so that really changes. I mean, yes, maybe we can talk about not changing the physical character, but that greatly, significantly changes the community character of our town, our city. And I actually disagree with Alex. We have a city. A lot of people are attracted here because it's a small city. It has a vibrant downtown, and that it's a very walkable, bikeable area. And I don't think we should lose sight of that. I mean, I think there are specific zones in Palo Alto that we can kind of, that really are more city-like and not suburban-like. And those are assets, and those are actually huge draws for people all around the world. And we should recognize that as an asset. And we should really start thinking, this is a high level, a comprehensive plan, general plan is a very high level, more of a 20,000 foot view of the community. And we should really start thinking about what is that character, the composition of our community. How do we start turning the dial back to, a time when there was a lot of different professions and incomes, and making that affordability more reachable for a greater spectrum of people.
Arthur, then Lisa.
So Mark Twain many years ago said the best investment is real estate because they ain't making any more of that stuff, except maybe Netherlands building on the water. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Let's first the definition. Affordable housing. There is a definition of affordable housing, and it's basically low, very low, moderate income, ultra. There's various levels. The moderate income, I think, is from 80 to 120% of area median income, which is based on the county. Judy Kleinberg, when she was mayor, talked about the idea of attainable housing as distinct from affordable housing. And there seems to be a gap, an increasing gap between the market rate housing and even what the below market rate housing is. There's a big gap in there. I think it's going to be hard to fill that gap. We might be able to build more affordable housing. We can talk about building smaller units, which are more naturally affordable. We can talk about building dedicated senior housing, which will allow seniors to downsize. Maybe they'll keep their place. Maybe they'll rent it out, maybe or something out. But that maybe they'll move, depending on what's going on. Those kind of things make sense. But it seems to me that, in some sense, we're dancing around the fact that there is a housing element, and the housing element deals with most of these issues. And the housing element just got adopted not that long ago. And we should think about what the implications of that housing element are before we go and start making a whole bunch of wholesale changes based on more, because let's see what it did. There were a lot of housing advocates who put input into the housing element. One of the problems with the housing element is it did not at all consider the impacts on schools and school capacity. As I mentioned earlier, the school district's most recent projection from December assume flat enrollment, but that assumes half of the housing production through 2030, assuming that they have the same flat line that they have in the school district's projection through 2030. Then our least amount of housing production from the scenario with the least amount of housing production, and so that's a problem. We need to consider school impact, school capacity, and school finances. One of the other issues is that I from one I've looked at, and I haven't gotten a chance to look through the whole EIR, but there's a consideration, if you build more housing, you get more money. But what about the amount of money per capita? Does the amount of money per capita go down? The amount of tax revenue per capita go down? If the amount of tax revenue per capita goes down, then in fact your services deteriorate. Even though there's more money, per capita goes down. If the total goes up slightly, but the population goes up even faster, then your amount of money per capita goes down, and therefore your services go down. I think that's important. There may be more money for the school district when we build more housing and put more students in the schools, but the amount of money per capita for the school district goes down because housing doesn't cover the costs of the students in that way. And there's also increased costs for new schools, for reopening schools. Where are we going to put the land for additional schools? Because, there was a decision made 30 years ago to sell off a whole bunch of school sites to build housing. We see how well that worked out. So I think that we need to think carefully about what we do and understand the impacts of the housing element we did adopt without considering schools. And we need to consider schools in the context and the not only school capacity and school enrollment increases, but the impacts on schools, the impacts on finances, and the impacts on our school kids of being in more crowded schools as we consider the DEIR. I'll add one thing to that, is that I actually oppose the idea of the SCAP being combined with Scenario 5. If Scenario 5 is supposed to be the idea of quality of life Combining it with SCAP is contradictory to that. If we want to consider the SCAP scenario, it needs to be scenario 6, not combined with scenario 5. So I just want to throw that in. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have 6 more people to go. If we give everybody 2 minutes, we are at about 5-ish minutes over, at least maybe a little bit more. I'm willing to do that. Okay, if everybody makes 2 minutes and 10 seconds. So Lisa, Bonnie, then Shani.
So on the affordable housing, I think a combination of things would work. And by affordable, I mean for people who don't make a lot of money relative to what we have today in Palo Alto. And that includes what many of us have said, the teachers, the firefighters, actually firefighters might get paid, but regardless, the lower income within our community. I think that diversity, economic diversity is critical, including in our schools. Certainly had it when I grew up here. I think it was one of the wonderful things about the area. I also think it led to a lot of the success and the innovation and the creativity here. So I think that economic diversity means affordable housing. And I would combine it with potentially, again, in some areas, higher buildings, more density, smaller units. They can be cheaper. And I think if we did it correctly, Palo Alto could also charge some money that we could use to subsidize some of the housing. I'm actually for subsidized housing. I'm not for rent control. But I think an actual program around subsidization, it would make some sense. So those are my couple thoughts.
Bonnie and Shani.
I'm very pleased that so many of the previous speakers have taught about the really different kinds of affordable housing, and Lydia raised the question. I think there's there are the technical definitions of affordable housing, and that's the affordable housing that tends to get subsidized by all the different regulatory programs that the nonprofit and some for-profit affordable housing developers utilize in order to build the projects. And the other kind of housing that Elaine was talking about is really like the attainable housing that you may achieve by increasing the supply to meet the demand and creating the smaller homes. This would be the non-subsidized, but by increasing the supply, you may be able to, as you say, turn the dial back on the price. But we're just one little town or city for how many square miles, and we're not going to solve the whole problem. It'd be naive to think that we could provide housing for everybody who works here or everybody who wants to live here. But what we don't want to do is create barriers to the building of the subsidized housing for the affordable, the very low. We want to create incentives and not barriers. And if that's the least we can do, I don't think Alex is probably right. I don't know that we'll ever be able to achieve enough supply to reduce these horrendous prices. But we can try, but what we can do is eliminate barriers to some really good projects for affordable housing for seniors or whomever, the defined affordable housing people,
Shani, then Annette.
One comment, Arthur, it was the city council that said that the SCAP should be incorporated, so you should talk to them about it, about the alternative, the fifth scenario in the SCAP. I don't agree that throwing everything and seeing what comes out of it is a good idea. I think we need to be very, very careful about how you move forward and really think hard about how we design something that works rather than let's try everything and something must work. We don't know what to do, so we'll try everything. I don't believe in that. I also think that when you build, and we have to realize it, the more you attract people, the more you attract people. So if we build more, there'll be a lot more demand, and the prices will go up, not down. That's what's happening in San Jose. That's what's happening in Mountain View. That's what's happening elsewhere. When you go and build more people come because it's more attractive. You have more community. You have more fun. People come. So building more does not make prices more affordable, it's actually the other way. I'm not sure that that is something that we don't want. I think that if we use that extra money to create affordable housing too, then we could consider that. But I don't want to see the idea that, oh, we'll build more and therefore it will be affordable. That does not work, we know this, and we shouldn't pretend that just by having more supply, that solved the problem and then prices will go down. That's not how it works. Thank you.
Annette, then Bob.
Well, I'm not so sure I had my hand up, but I believe this whole discussion belongs to the housing element. If we're really focused, we can philosophize all we want, but we really have to zone for what we want. We should have coordinated area plans, and we should subsidize housing. So I'm not sure where this fits in the comp plan. I think it's really a much more detailed conversation.
Thank you, Bob. And then Alex, who's our last speaker.
One of the maybe the differences in the terminology that I might bring in is to separate out the rental stock from the to-be-bought stock, because like when I'm watching my kids, they're renting homes or they're renting spaces, and yet some of the projects that are built are to be sold. And so I wanted to create at least aspirations that would consider the rental stock versus just the to be sold. I also, was in Whole Foods chatting with someone who had to leave Palo Alto because of the increase in rent. And I'm not opposed to some limits or controls on the amount that rent can be increased, because this person had a 200% increase in their rent. It was short term, and in the discussion, she wasn't necessarily asking for something that was not allowing the owner to raise the rent, but just something that was livable. And so I would ask that we look at essentially a focus on creating rental housing stock, that the rental housing stock could be dedicated towards target folks. I was thinking of Ellen's remark where the cook couldn't cook for our seniors, and if we don't have a cook for our seniors, we don't take care of our seniors. And so we can do that through rental controls that we can't do through own controls. So those are just some thoughts. Sorry to go on.
No worries. Alex, and then we just have a few business items to take care of.
I wanted to make one. I just looked it up. The affordable housing definition, at least the one I found on Wikipedia, which of course it's on the internet, so it's true, is 30% of your income, no more than 30% of your income is used for housing. If the median income is $125,000, that works out to about $37,500 a year spent on housing. I mean, I just think we need to wake up and realize the ship has sailed on that low a cost for people. I mean, the cost for living here and the mortgages that people are paying are just crazy. And the thing that would change it would be if one of the big three were to leave. If Facebook or Google or Apple, but all of them have invested in huge infrastructure. They're here. They're not moving. I think this situation is here, so we have to think beyond that. And this may lead us to want to think more regionally, because I don't think the housing will come from within, but it might come from outside.
Doria, go.
Just really quickly, I wanted to say I had a discussion with the mayor of San Jose, and a lot of people have talked a lot about having housing dedicated for certain job categories. They tried to do that in San Jose, and it's illegal in the state to do it. So I think it's important to know that if it's true. I mean, that's what the mayor of San Jose said, because then we should take that off the board and quit talking about it, because it's silly if you can't do it.
There are other issues involved with that as well. Aspen, a community not dissimilar from our own, although much smaller, has had subsidized housing for some years. And now that it's been up and running for about 30 years, there are a whole series of follow-on issues in terms of people being able to realize their capital investment or not having that. But those are sort of beyond the topic right here. Let us close this particular piece. I need a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting. Anyone? Thank you, Alex, and seconded by Bonnie. All in favor, sorry. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. I'm sorry?
Send in comments.
Yes, if you have additional comments, please forward those to staff so they can be distributed to the subcommittee as well as to the rest of us. I am not at the next land use meeting. I am out of the country on April 19th. Let me just ask very quickly if anybody has any comments about how we cobble together a process for today's conversation. Any thoughts or improvements there, Elaine?
I'd recommend some discussion with staff beforehand. And I think staff had set up a number of questions, and I think if we had gone through and hit each one of those 4 topics in the sort of, identified a straw poll question and then also like some ground rules for discussion, I think that would have been a very, structured way. So I would just recommend that I would love to see us spend our time here focused on the discussion of the topics and not less on process. So if there's a way to just cue that up before the next meeting.
Sometimes hard to do without everyone's input, but understand the efficiency that it would achieve. Anybody else, Alex?
I'd like to just ask if there's any way to find if there's any parallel situation to our community size-wise, and I know there's almost no duplicate for the economy, but it'd be helpful to have something to look at, some illustration about how they might have handled the land use issue.
Specific to affordable housing?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And attainable housing. We can ask staff. Anything else? A motion to adjourn. Sorry, Jennifer, just before we do that.
Can you tell us again who is on the land use committee?
Oh, boy.
Just the
Does anybody have the list? The subcommittee. That's what I mean.
I've...
That would work.
Who's on it?
I don't remember.
Yes, I will send that out. I had sent
That'd
that
be
out
great.
to staff about a week ago, and I will send it out again.
Thank you.
And as for Elaine, Amy, Lydia, Doria, Julia, Bonnie, and Steve, we will define the housing contingent representatives shortly. Yes. Oh, go ahead. The subcommittee of land use is Elaine. Elena.
Amy Sung, Annette Glankoff, Alex Van Riesen, Hamilton Hitchings, Stephen Levy, Len Philpott, and Shawnee Kleinhaus, Doria Suma, and Jennifer Hetterly.
All right, a motion to adjourn between Lydia and Amy. We are done. Annette, you moved? Whatever.
And for those who care, K-Stitch 1 Ohio.
Whoa.